The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, tomsbeets, THOMSBEETS.com.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from my book, Unequal Protection, The Rise of Corporate Dominance and the Theft of Human Rights. This is right after in the chapter where I lay out how the Supreme Court in 1886 actually did not rule that corporations are persons, even though the clerk of the court wrote that into the head note. And then we get into, where we got with this. This is page 109, the Republican conspiracy theory that empowered FDR. In the early 1930s, the stock market had collapsed and the world was beginning a long and dark slide into the Great Depression and eventually to World War II. Millions were out of work in the United States, and the questions on people's minds were, why did this happen and who's responsible? The teetering towers of wealth created by American industrialists during the late 1800s and early 1900s were largely thought to have contributed to or caused the stock market crash and ensuing depression. In less than 100 years, corporations had gone from being a legal fiction used to establish colleges and trading companies to standing as the single most powerful force in American politics. Many working people felt that corporations had seized control of the country's political agenda, capturing senators, congressmen, the Supreme Court, and even recent presidents in the magnetic force of their great wealth. Proof of this takeover could be found in Supreme Court decisions in the years between 1908 and 1914, when the Supreme Court, often citing corporate personhood, struck down minimum wage laws, workmen's compensation laws, utility regulation, and child labor laws, every kind of law that a people might institute to protect its citizenry from corporate abuse. Unions and union members were the victims of violence from private corporate armies and had been declared criminal conspiracies by both business leaders and politicians. It seemed the corporations had staged a coup, seizing the lives of American workers, the majority of voters, as well as the elected officials who were supposed to represent them. And this was in direct contradiction to the spirit expressed by the founders of our country. It was in this milieu that an American history book, first published in 1927 but largely ignored, suddenly became a hot topic. In The Rise of American Civilization, Columbia University history professor Charles Beard and women's suffragist Mary Beard suggested that the rise of corporations on the American landscape was the result of a grand conspiracy that reached from the boardrooms of the nation's railroads all the way to the Supreme Court. They fingered two Republicans, former Senator and railroad lawyer Roscoe Conkling, and former Congressman and railroad lawyer John A. Bingham. The theory, in short form, was that Conkling, when he was part of the Senate committee that wrote the 14th Amendment back in 1868, had intentionally inserted the word person instead of the correct legal phrase natural person to describe who would get the protections of that amendment. Bingham similarly worked in the House of Representatives to get the language passed. Once that time bomb was put into place, Conkling and Bingham left elective office to join in litigating on behalf of the railroads, with the goal of exploding their carefully worded amendment in the face of the Supreme Court. Thus, quote, Republican lawmakers, the Beards said, conspired in advance to give full human constitutional rights to corporate legal fictions. By a few words skillfully chosen, they wrote, every act of every state and local government which touched adversely the rights of corporate persons and property was made subject to review and liable to annulment by the Supreme Court at Washington, D.C. This conspiracy theory was widely accepted because the supposed conspirators themselves had said very publicly, we did it. Earlier, in an 1882 case pitting the railroads against San Mateo County, California, Conkling testified as a paid witness for the railroads that he had slipped the person language into the amendment, the 14th Amendment, to ensure that corporations would one day receive the same civil rights Congress was giving to freed slaves. Bingham made similar assertions when appropriate during his terms as a paid witness for the railroads. As a result of these assertions, through the late years of the 1800s, both of these two men were the well-off darlings of the railroad, basking in the light of their successful appropriation of human rights for corporations. When the Beard's book was widely read in the 1930s, it gave names and faces to the villains who had turned control of America over to what were then called the robber barons of industry. Conklin, Bingham, and Justice Waite were all dead by the time of the Great Depression and all judged guilty by the American people of pulling off the biggest con in the history of our republic. The firestorm of indignation that swept the country helped set the stage for Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, using legislative means and packing the Supreme Court to turn back corporate power and that corporate takeover, at least in part, and returning to average working citizens some of the rights and benefits that they had felt had been stolen from them in that Supreme Court head note in 1886. It was widely accepted that Conkling and Bingham had pulled off this trick successfully, purposefully saying person instead of natural person or citizen when they helped write the 14th Amendment, and corporate personhood was a fait accompli. It was done and couldn't be undone. The Supreme Court, confronted with the reality of the language of the 14th Amendment, had been forced to recognize that corporations were persons under the U.S. Constitution because of the precedent of that 1886 Santa Clara case. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge apparently ratified the coup on January 8, 1915, when he unwittingly promulgated Conkling's myth in a speech to the Senate about the 1882 San Mateo case cited above.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Wow, a lot going on in the world today. I say that way too much, but it seems it's just like this never-ending reality show that Donald Trump keeps bringing us, and now it's getting really strange. I mean, in the area of religion. And the Republicans have always had this bizarre relationship with religion where they have used, and actually, you know, before the 1960s, it was the Democrats who were doing the same thing. You know, whichever party has holds the mantle of being the racist party, although both of them were fairly racist up until the last 40, 50 years here. But this sales pitch that the Republican Party has made that they're the party of Jesus, right? They're the party, the Christian party. They're the party of the guy who says that, you know, everybody who wants health care should have it and it should be free. They're the party of the guy who says that anybody who's hungry, we should feed them. That if people are homeless, we should house them. That if they're naked, we should clothe them. That if they're in prison, we should go visit them. And I mean, you know, this is their guy, right? Jesus, you know, laying out these principles, but you know, they're not doing what he's saying. And now you've got Franklin Graham coming out, Billy Graham's son. And Billy's got to be rolling over in his grave. I mean, this is just so sad. William Franklin Graham III, in January, he had come out and said, Trump says he didn't have an affair with Stormy Daniels. We should all believe him. That's what he was saying 4 months ago. 5 months ago, I guess. And now he's saying, as it becomes more and more obvious that Trump actually did get it on with Stormy Daniels, and that's why he paid the $130 grand. Now Franklin Graham is going, I think this thing with Stormy Daniels and so forth is nobody's business. We've got other business at hand that we need to deal with. Right. Nobody's business. Now, you know, he was singing a very different song in 1998 when Republicans were trying to impeach Bill Clinton. And this points out how, you know, how this political party has bonded itself to these religious fanatics. Back in 98, in a Wall Street Journal op-ed titled "Clinton's Sins Are Not Private," Franklin Graham, that's the same guy, the son of Billy, said private conduct does have public consequences. Just look at how many have already been pulled under by the wake of the president's sin. Mr. Clinton's wife and daughter, Ms. Lewinsky, her parents, White House staff members, friends and supporters, public and officials, and an unwitting American public. The God of the Bible says that what one does in private does matter. If he will lie to or mislead his wife and daughter, those with whom he is most intimate, what will prevent him from doing the same to the American public? Wrote Franklin Graham back when they were talking about impeaching Bill Clinton. And now that the talk is about, well, what do we do about Donald Trump, Franklin Graham? Oh, I think this whole Stormy Daniels thing and so forth. Nobody's business. Nobody's business. Meanwhile, Paige Patterson, I know it sounds like a woman's name, it's a man. Paige is the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, or the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, excuse me. And Mr. Patterson says abused women should not divorce their abusive husbands. And he told a story in a sermon about a fellow noticing an attractive 16-year-old girl walking by going, yeah, she's nice, and then in his sermon, telling the story that another guy said, oh yeah, she is, man, is she built, etc. And a number of the women in the congregation were offended with this story. After the Washington Post, this is from a Washington Post piece by Sarah Pullman Bailey. After the Washington Post published clips of Patterson's sermons, which that included comments about women, the Southwestern media website that hosted them stopped working. Oh, gee, we can't find those anymore. One of the videos included a 2010 address in which Patterson called out female seminary students for not doing enough to make themselves pretty, saying, shouldn't be any wonder why some of you don't get a second look. So, you know, here we're seeing these mega churches. This is a classic deal with the devil. And what the question in my mind is, what do we do about this? What do we do with this situation? You now have Republicans in Kentucky, this House Bill 40, calling for a day of prayer in the state's schools. Now, the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment says that, you know, government can't establish religion. In fact, there were two major cases in 62 and 63 on this. And basically what they said is that, you know, the school can't run the prayer. The school can provide a moment of meditation. Students, it has to be student-directed, student-initiated activities. But, you know, we have a long history of using religion in our schools to beat up specific religions. From the 1840s until, you know, the early 1900s, you know, a lot of school prayer was actually meant to trash Catholics. In fact, Horace Mann's whole sales pitch for public education in the 1890s in Boston was on behalf of the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner, the secret society, sometimes called the Know-Nothings. That was their slogan, I know nothing. Was, you know, we will break the back of the Catholic parents by outlawing Catholic schools and forcing these Catholics into public schools. It's a whole interesting history. You can find that elsewhere. But so, E.J. Dionne in the Washington Post a couple of days ago, no wonder there's an exodus from religion. Are you leaving religion? Are the people that you're knowing leaving religion? Is a religion, you know, this he's talking about this study. And now we see Reverend Patrick Conroy, the Jesuit priest for the House. Paul Ryan has decided not to ask demand that he stay fired. But the House Republican leadership, E.J. Dionne writes, was more inclined to push out a chaplain than to impose accountability on a president who's a proven liar and trashes the rule of law for his own selfish purposes day after day. And then they talk about this book, Amazing Grace, this 2010 book by Robert Putnam and David Campbell. And what they found is that increasingly people, particularly young people, have no interest in religion. They're leaving religion. This trend, he writes, E.J. Dionne writes, is especially pronounced among adults under 30. Roughly 40% of people under 30 claim no connection to religion. And he says, young people have come to regard religion, in Putnam and Campbell's words, as, quote, judgmental, homophobic, hypocritical, and too political. And meanwhile, John Pavlovitz, a former megachurch pastor, I shared part of this with you last week. He has a blog. His blog is johnpavlovitz.com, Pavlovitz.com. And the top post there is, good news, church, you're dying. Good news and bad news here. He says, you're dying because of your hypocrisy. People see the ever-widening chasm between who you say you are and what they regularly experience in your presence. And he talks about the difference in, the hospitality, essentially, that Jesus promotes versus the hate of what the church is promoting these days. They've listened to you preach incessantly about immorality in the world, the dangers of greed, the corrupt nature of power, the poison of untruth, the evils of sexual perversion, and watched you willingly align with a president embodying all of these. Is Donald Trump going to destroy the church? Is Mike Pence going to destroy the church? He says, you're dying because of your willful ignorance. People are tired of your war on science. They're sick of your arguing with biology. They know the earth is round. They know it's billions, not thousands of years old. They know dinosaurs walked on it. They know it's warming rapidly. They know that people here don't choose their sexuality. They know whoever and whatever God is doesn't appoint presidents or sanction weapons or attack people with tornadoes. You're dying because of your devotion to cruelty. And that's a pretty tough one. People watch you dig in your heels against others because of their gender identity and sexual orientation, the way you continually exact violence upon them, the way you try and blame God and the Bible for your fearful bigotry. You're dying because you're complicit in violence. They've seen you so often be a safe haven for misogynists, domestic abusers, sexual predators, and white supremacists. Is the church dying? Is it time for the church to die? Is it time for, and this at the same time that the church is aggressively working to try to become more powerful politically. And I realize there's not the church. And certainly there are some very progressive denominations out there, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish, but among others. So where do we go with this?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
How much damage is the Trump administration doing to religion? And how much damage are people like, Franklin Graham doing to religion too? And welcome back. Oh, let's see here. Helen in Fairmont, West Virginia. Hey, Helen, what's on your mind today?
Oh, Donald Trump, the West Virginia primary, and
yeah, that's tomorrow.
Yes, but look at our three candidates running on the Republican ticket.
Mm-hmm.
Blankenship.
Is anybody, by the way, on the Democratic side, is anybody challenging Joe Manchin, or is he's sailing to victory, right?
Well, he might sail to victory, but there is a woman running.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just so disappointed. Don Blankenship, I don't know whether you've seen any of his ads. They're totally disgusting.
I have.
Have you seen Evan Jenkins, the guy that used to be a Democrat and is now a Republican? And they're all running with Trump pictures. Patrick Morrissey is. And I sincerely hope that West Virginia voters do not elect a one of them, because as far as I'm concerned, they're all beneath the mantle of the Senate.
Well, I think Joe Manchin has done a pretty good job of playing the middle, essentially.
Yeah, he says he works for West Virginia. Of course, I wish they'd never mine another drop of coal in West Virginia myself. I'd like to see them retrain the miners. They're a small workforce compared to everybody else. I'd like to see them get out of those mines and go, go with the wind power or
well, increasingly that's happening. I mean,
something.
more and more, what we're seeing is that these clean energy jobs are providing the majority of new jobs in America right now, number one. And number two, instead of going down into the mines, they're doing mountaintop removal. I mean, which takes 5 guys and a couple of big trucks instead of 50 guys.
And they say it's worse than the underground mining for the environment.
That's correct. That's correct.
And also, I'd like to say that the co-operators have never been for the miner. They're always for the profit. I don't think they've ever considered the safety of miners ever.
Isn't that why Don Blankenship went to jail?
Yes, he wanted production more than he wanted safety, I believe. And he was guilty of lots of safety violations, and now I guess they can dump stuff in our streams now.
Yep.
I wouldn't want to eat a fish out of our streams, that's for sure. And Donald Trump, I'm so disgusted with the churches because they're not following Jesus. If somebody knocked on their door 3 times, the Republicans would close it in their face.
Oh, and if it was a person with skin as dark as Jesus's was, the Republicans would call the police on them.
Right, or shoot them through the door.
Yep.
I'm telling you, I've never thought any political party would be so denigrated and so evil as they seem to be anymore.
Yeah, it's a real tragedy, Helen.
It is.
It really is.
And we had an episode here. We have American Baptist churches. Well, the First Baptist Church on 9th Street said that they didn't believe homosexuality was a sin. And guess what they got voted out of? The American Baptist churches.
Amazing.
So.
Amazing. That's unfortunate. Helen, thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing your stories from West Virginia with us. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back. In the church, calling out the church, and it's not just their support of Trump. It's not just the adultery thing and the lying thing and the, he's averaging now 9 lies a day. Just a year ago he was averaging 6 lies a day. So it's like they're getting cranked up, apparently. And, you know, as far as I know, in his entire 8 years in office, Barack Obama told one lie, which is, you know, if you like your health insurance now, before Obamacare, you can keep it after Obamacare, which was technically true. I mean, you can still have insurance. It just won't be the exact same policy because there's, you know, it'll actually be a better policy. But, you know, but that, quote, lie, you know, was used by the Republicans to trash Obama for years. Years. Right? We have all memorized that, you know, Obama's one lie in 8 years. Trump tells 9 lies a day. It's incredible. And the church is not calling him out on his lies. They're not calling him out on his adultery. They're not calling him out on basically any of this because they see Donald Trump as a path to more power and more money. And when they're after power and money, you have to ask the question, is it even a church anymore? You know, are you loving mammon more than God? I mean, it's not even a church, in my opinion. Meanwhile, there's a really interesting story, and this is not getting much attention, and I think this is a huge, big deal. And that this is this reporting that David Fahrenthold and Jonathan O'Connell and Jack Gilliam are doing in the New York Times, that it looks like starting around 2006, Donald Trump and his company started buying property for cash. And, I mean, we're talking $400 million worth of properties that they bought with cash. Now, number one, nobody knows where they got this kind of cash. This is a company that had been bankrupt, right? So where did the cash come from, number one? And number two, what does this tell us about Donald Trump's business? See, buying properties for cash is generally considered stupid in the real estate world because say you got $100 million. You can buy one $100 million building and make, say, you know, $1 million a year on it. Or you can use that $100 million as a 10% deposit and you can buy 10 $100 million buildings and, you know, make $1 million on each one of them every month in terms of rent and income and whatnot. And, you know, I mean, you can massively leverage your money, which is what Trump had always been doing prior to 2006. So now there's folks kind of scratching their heads going, huh, is he running a money laundering operation? And if so, for whom? Which takes us to 2014 when golf writer James Dobson is playing golf with Eric Trump. And he says, so I got in the cart with Eric, and as we were setting off, I said, Eric, who's funding you? I know no banks because of the recession. No banks have touched a golf course. Who's funding you? And this is what he said. He said, well, we really don't rely on American banks. We have all the funding we need out of Russia. He said, oh, yeah, we got some of these guys that really, really love golf, and they're really invested in our programs. We just go there all the time. Really?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
In fact, Reuters has reported a group of 63 Russian oligarchs, billionaires, who have invested $100 million in Trump property just in Florida. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from America's Battle for Media Democracy, The Triumph of Corporate Libertarianism and the Future of Media Reform by Victor Pickard. This is from the chapter number 4, page 98. It's titled The Origins of the Fairness Doctrine. Barely a year had passed since the Blue Book controversy when similar conflicts over public interest regulation re-emerged. This round of contentious debates centered on whether to repeal the Mayflower Doctrine, which prohibited broadcasters from editorializing politically. Broadcasters' growing political power emboldened them to challenge the Larry Fly-era FCC decision, which would spark the last major radio reform battle of the 1940s. Fearing a further commercialized, conservative-biased, corporate-dominated medium should broadcasters gain the right to editorialize, Many progressives saw at stake, as one news article put it, the future of radio as an instrument of service to the people. Reformers marshaled considerable support from the still intact coalition from the Blue Book debates to rally for the Mayflower decision's preservation. Similar to those debates, broadcasters attacked the reformers' position with First Amendment rights arguments that aimed to delegitimize the FCC's regulatory power over broadcast programming. This episode involved a number of ironies. Most notably, the controversial rule that later became known as the Fairness Doctrine, which to this day is often invoked by progressives as the high watermark of enlightened media policy, actually came about as a kind of consolation prize for post-war liberals who had advocated stricter regulation. The following chapter recovers this forgotten history. In doing so, it lays bare a number of early tensions and contradictions that closed out a decade of contentious policy debates around normative understandings of media's democratic role. This history throws into sharp relief several significant parallels and connections to 21st century media challenges, particularly around the question of whether government has any affirmative regulatory authority over media. Toward the end of the 1940s, progressive forces were in disarray. The remains of the Popular Front, including many New Deal liberals, were largely disintegrated, especially after the Progressive Party's disastrous loss in the 1948 election. What had been a rising social democratic challenge was now widely seen as dangerously socialistic, even in its diminished state. With the communist witch hunt in full swing, the broadcast industry exploited Cold War politics to discredit reformers by claiming that the reformers' real agenda was to destroy free radio. J. Edgar Hoover harassed the FCC on a regular basis with letters and unsolicited reports on subversive broadcasters. And the FCC's actions were aggressively scrutinized as Congress and the FBI put the Commission on notice for a number of unofficial investigations. Writing to Larry Fly, this is the FCC commissioner, about the endless red baiting, Clifford Durr confided, "When I read of the present plans to protect the country against the dangerous thinking of us bureaucrats, I'm inclined to look back with nostalgia on the days when the Commission stood more or less firmly against our friend J. Edgar." By the late 1940s, the FCC's more progressive wing, aside from Durr, had become more passive on issues related to regulatory oversight of broadcasting programming. The tide clearly had turned in the favor of the commercial broadcasters. Rendering the landscape even less hospitable for media reform, the industry attacks against the FCC coincided with an increasingly right-wing tilt in D.C. politics. Even before the 1948 presidential election, liberals were in various states of retreat. FDR had died, the New Deal agenda lay in tatters, and Republicans were coming off a congressional sweep in the 1946 midterm elections. The Democrats would regain some ground electorally by taking back Congress in '48, but the ideological shift was more permanent. During his campaign, President Truman characterized 1948 as the decisive year of the challenge, with a primary choice between, quote, between a parcel labeled progressive liberalism and a parcel labeled reactionary conservatism, end quote. However, Truman's liberalism often proved to be largely rhetorical. After he eked out a victory in a four-way race, his administration quickly shied away from the previous administration's aggressive liberalism, ever mindful of Southern conservative Democrats and Republicans nipping at their flanks. Truman's market-friendly orientation led him to espouse commercial broadcasters' policy positions. Invoking his support for the, quote, American system, end quote, of broadcasting, he insisted in an open letter to Broadcasting Magazine's Sol Taishoff that, quote, America, as the birthplace of radio, should have a free, competitive system unfettered by artificial barriers and regulated only as to the laws of nature and the limitation of facilities, end quote. Deferring to the laws of the market, Truman ordered is, quote, preferred over rigid government regulation of a medium that by its very nature must be maintained as free as the press, end quote. The same issue of broadcasting contained an editorial amplifying Truman's message to the FCC that regulation was to be off the table. A similar statement followed 10 months later with Broadcasting triumphantly announcing that Truman, quote, emphatically reaffirmed his belief in completely free radio, end quote, which according to the editors translated into, quote, a declaration on behalf of a broadcasting system unshackled by un-American regulations, end quote. It's amazing. America's battle for media democracy, the triumph of corporate libertarianism and the future of media reform. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. Thom Hartmann here with you. So in some states, the Republicans are trying to bring back prayer in schools. And all across the nation, Christian Republicans, and I put that in quotes, are trying to tell us that, well, you know, whatever Donald Trump did, that's kind of up to him. Yeah. Well, you know, a lot of us thought that that was the case with Bill Clinton, too. You know, what he does in private is up to him. But when you start lying about it, then you've put yourself in a position where you could be blackmailed. You know, if you are worried enough about something coming out that you're willing to lie over it, then you're blackmailable. And if you're president of the United States, and that was the one argument they made about Clinton that I thought, you know, there's actually something to that argument, that he could be blackmailed if he's willing to lie, and he did lie. He was willing to lie, and if you could be blackmailed, then, you know, whether you're trying to hide it from your wife or from your country, it doesn't much matter. Blackmail is blackmail. Vulnerability is vulnerability. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I think, you know, you're on a good topic, but it's a complex one. I think we are in a period of what the phenomenon known as positive Christianity or affirmative Christianity. We saw it at the turn of the century, or the turn of last century in Europe and America, for that matter. But, you know, we know, you know, without having to recount the events of World War II, we know what happened in Germany and throughout Europe. The difference in what really worries me is because of globalization in this century and our tendency to become, you know, America's tendency to prefer authoritarianism. With that, with positive Christianity and our tendency towards authoritarianism in this country, it really worries me where this is going to come to.
Can you define positive Christianity for me, Dave?
Do what now?
Can you define positive Christianity?
Yeah, positive is such a loaded word because what's wrong with positivity, right? Well, that's why I sometimes say affirmative Christianity. Yeah, it is basically where it's a combination of things. It's very complex, but basically, if you're if Jesus or God, Yahweh, whatever, is not rewarding you with material you know, benefits, you start asking yourself, what's the purpose? You know?
This is the NeoCalvinism.
I'm sorry?
This is NeoCalvinism, the way that we know who God really loves and who God thinks should be ruling over all of us is by who God has blessed with wealth.
Yes, and political reward and et cetera, et cetera. And I understand, you know all this, but this is, I just wanted to say that, like when John McCain was on the stage, and the lady, that guy threw up that little old lady, you know, and she said, Barack Obama is a Muslim. He's an Arab. Mm-hmm. John McCain took the hard, correct thing and said, no, ma'am, he is not. And that may have, you know, finished his aspirations for presidency and picking Sarah Palin. But it was so important what he did by taking that hard right to try to remove, you know, the nemesis, the boogeyman. Yeah. All right, and to remind us of that. And also, I just wanted to say to all Trump supporters that call themselves Christian, I want to challenge them. Look, if it's about the economy, if it's about your paycheck, and a president is above the law, and they have just tripled a surveillance in America, okay? If all this is true, and a president's above the law, why have elections?
Right. Right.
What's the purpose?
And well, or for that matter, if you know, all the decisions being made are going to be made to the benefit of billionaires and corporations, and very little that's going to be done is going to be done for the benefit of the average person, why have elections? And this is an argument, by the way, and Dave, thanks for the call. Well said. This is an argument that Republicans are making right now, which is, oh, both parties are the same, and you know, it's all broken, and you know, et cetera, et cetera. They do this through sock puppets. They do this through, you know, people who are spreading this kind of discouraging message. And the whole point is to try to suppress the vote. Chris in Bensonville, Illinois. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. I hear that you still sound like Vito Corleone, huh? You still got that throat thing?
Oh, yeah, it's fading out. Yeah, I'm getting better, Chris. What's up?
Okay. Well, I did a little research the other day, and I looked up evangelicals. They got a lot to do with the Lutherans and the Calvinists, but basically, it's their belief is God's grace. So they also say that it doesn't matter how many good deeds you do in your life, the outcomes is still, going to be the same.
Yeah, this is where James's position kind of contrasts with Paul's. But, that said, I think one of the big problems now is that Billy Graham is actually promoting, Franklin Graham is now promoting the idea that once you're saved forever, no matter what. And therefore, you can kind of backslide in terms of behavior and it doesn't much matter.
Yeah. And I'd have to say that Trump saying he's a good Christian, he must be delusional. He must be an evangelical.
Yeah.
He must absolutely believe that stuff.
Yeah, I don't think Trump believes any of that stuff. But like so many of these politicians, particularly Republican politicians, he's enthusiastic to use it to bring the rubes in to vote for him, so that he can have power and ultimately wealth as well. Chris, thanks for the call. Brian in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Yeah. Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Just want to touch on a couple of things on the subject of religion. And earlier in the broadcast, you were saying that, there is a leaning toward the younger people to leaving the church. There's more people leaving the church.
Right.
So I have a personal
or at least not denominationally affiliating. About 40% of people under 30.
Well, yeah, some people will say that that they're spiritual or something
Right.
like that. And and I understand that. I worked with youth, teenagers in a church for about 10, 12 years, and in the last 4 or 5 years, I could really see our numbers were declining. I could really see that these kids are very, very smart, very, very sharp. Anything that cannot be really supported by sound logic and by justice turns, they're not going to buy into that.
Yeah.
And so even from the standpoint why I decided to take a sabbatical, which now turned out to be an extended period of time, because I was looking what was going on and what was being done in justification by religion. And a prime example of that's what's going on today. We've got people shooting children in the Middle East because the Bible said that this land is mine, or like that. That has got to stop. And we got to look at something in terms of what is just and what is human injustice, regardless of what religion is there.
Yeah.
And what I see is just this overbearing hypocrisy. And I listen to people justifying why they're doing such and such a thing like that. This has got to change.
Yeah.
Because our whole world is tied up in this fear, and so much hypocrisy is a result of religion.
Yeah.
I need to ask you a question as well. I listen to the Progressive channel, quite regularly, and I'd like to know from someone how progressive is that channel. I have seen nothing that is challenging or talking about a discussion on what's going on in the Middle East. Maybe I'm missing a certain broadcast or something like that. I haven't heard it.
Yeah,
so
I'm guessing that.
What is your position on Israel-Palestine?
My position on Israel-Palestine, Brian, is that we need a two-state solution. That Israel is not being a good actor in this, and frankly, the Palestinians haven't been up to this point as well. There were a lot of mistakes during the Arafat times, but there was also a lot of sabotage on the Israeli side. And, as a result of this, Israel has devolved into basically an apartheid state. And the world is looking at it with some horror. And at the same time, they're enthusiastic to exploit all these so-called Christians who think that If they can just, get Israel to the point where there's that final war, where there's only 144,000 survivors who all convert to Christianity at the very last minute, then Jesus will return. So it's a very bizarre situation there. John in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how's it going? You said something last week that really struck me. You said, you used to refer to yourself as a Christian. Now you really still steer clear of doing that just because you get lumped in with all these other
Well, I'll still call myself
Christians.
a Christian just to kick the shins of these self-righteous blowhards.
Well, I consider myself a Christonian because it's of a place in my heart and the way I live my life. I focus more on, the Christian church has gone complete gung-ho on grace, like you were just saying earlier, and on salvation, and they pump the pulpit on these 10 commandments and totally ignore the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah.
And through grace, they're teaching, they're excusing hypocrisy. And I think there was a little cat back in the day that's by the name of Jesus Christ who screamed at the top of his lungs against hypocrisy.
Yep. Yeah, these guys
many times.
Yeah, these guys would rather preach Deuteronomy than they would, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. It's just, it is not, in my opinion, it's not Christianity. John, thank you for the call. And frankly, the reason I brought all this up is because of this much larger issue. Now that you've got, a state explicitly saying, oh, we're going to have state-sponsored prayer in our schools. Are we going to refight this? Is this the new Republican strategy to peel off another 5% of the electorate?
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Abortion wasn't enough to appeal to these people. Now it's going to be, oh, well, we've got to have prayer in schools, too. We'll see. And welcome back. Richard in Greenville, Kentucky. Hey, Richard, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, happy birthday, Tom.
Well, thank you, Richard.
I was just wondering, why is the church still tax exempt when they put so much money into politics now?
That's a damn good question, Richard. The Internal Revenue Service is supposed to enforce the law, but in the face of widespread law breaking, and actually during the last election, churches, right-wing Christian churches and megachurches actually literally passing out campaign material in violation of the law, and in some cases sending proof of that to the IRS by way of saying, nah, we dare you to enforce the law, knowing that, at least while Obama was president, that the IRS was not willing to enforce that law against right-wing churches. And obviously, with Trump as president, he's not going to ask the IRS to enforce that law either. So that's the situation. And in fact, Trump campaigned on doing away with the so-called Johnson Amendment, which is the law that says that if you want Tom and Richard to pay for your police and your fire and all your other services that are typically paid for with taxes, if you want to be tax exempt and have all the rest of us pay your way, then at least you've got to stay out of politics. That was passed in, I think, 1956. It was called the Johnson Amendment. Lyndon Johnson pushed it through, and this was Trump's big thing, is we're gonna blow off the Johnson Amendment and all that damage. Richard, thanks for the call. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
They say it's your birthday. Anyway, happy birthday,
Thank you.
Professor.
Thank you, Morris.
Hey, listen, I just want to say I am a man of Christ. I'm not an American Christian. I go by Matthew chapter 25, verse 40. We don't have to read it now. That'll also help you identify who the antichrists are. But many of our problems today, Professor, begin with what is called the doctrine of discovery. Y'all can go online and read Daniel in Paul. There's only 14 pages. Daniel in Paul, the doctrine of discovery. And it's going to go back to a guy named Pope Nicholas V, who issued what were called papal bulls. And back then, what that meant was if you came across some people who were not white and Christian, you could subjugate them. And divinely, the Lord God gave you the right to do such a thing. Now, these ideas have been refuted by the World Council of Churches, which have said that the doctrine of discovery was fundamentally opposed to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Right. And how that ties in to America today, you have to go back to Chief Justice John Marshall, because American law, as well as many Western European countries, are tied in to the doctrine of discovery. Check it out. And I appreciate you giving me this time, and happy birthday once again, Professor.
Well, thank you, Morris. And you're absolutely right. And this was used to justify empire, you know, through the French Empire, the Dutch Empire, the British Empire, the American Empire. Yeah, we are, you know, taking the word of Jesus to the noble or to the savages. There's nothing noble about them. This story says, and you know, enslaving them and exploiting them, all in the name of Jesus. And just, you know, keep picking that cotton, and your reward will come in the next lifetime. And you know, this whole theology, this basically kind of you know, enslavement theology, for lack of a better phrase. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Welcome back. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, Viagra for your brain. John in Chicago. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how are you today?
I'm well. What's up?
I just wanted to make a quick comment. Earlier in the show, you had said you had asked whether the church was dying, and should it die. And as a lifelong atheist, I don't have a great amount of love for religion. I think that a lot can be learned from it. But if I could, what I would do would be to do away with religion as a sanctified study. I mean, there's a lot to learn from religious texts, but I would love to, if we could keep the institution of church as a way of having a community gathering space.
Then you want to become a Unitarian Universalist.
You think so? I've heard of you supporting the ethical humanists on your show, and I haven't tried that out. But
no, the Unitarians, the Unitarian Church and the Universalist Church merged back in the 60s or 70s or something, and now it's the UU, the Unitarian Universalists. And this was Henry David Thoreau's church. I mean, this goes way back. And basically, they don't even acknowledge the existence of a deity, of a God. But they don't disavow a God either. And, they have services, people sing songs, sing hymns, they're very socially active, very involved in their communities. And it's a place where people go and if you want to seek the divine, you can find it there. And if you just want to seek a secular conversation, you'll find that there too.
Oh, wow, that's great. Thanks. And thanks for providing this forum, Tom. I think this is a great show. I'm a big fan of yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you, John.
Yep, have a good day.
You too. Seriously, though, check out the Unitarians. You'll be impressed. Doug in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Doug, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, good on you, and thanks for what you do. I listen to you every day, and I finally got a chance to call. This topic really struck me. What gets me is, Christ had a contempt for any religion, and he was basically just obedient to the word of his Father. And any person that clarifies or classifies himself as a Christian, I'm wary of, because I'm like some of the other callers, a follower of Christ. And for 65 years, I had a contempt for religion itself until a recovery program, very famous recovery program with 2 letters in it, taught me that the difference between worldly and spiritual. Yeah. And that's a problem I see with Franklin Graham and all these other guys, is they have a worldly desire and basically an addiction. Yeah. And they forget the spiritual side of it.
Yeah, I agree. And it's to power and money. And these guys are rich, and they are powerful, and it's addictive. Doug, excellent points all. Thank you for the call. Elizabeth in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Elizabeth, what's up? Yep, Elizabeth sounds like she hung up by accident. Joe in Cupertino, California. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind?
Tom, Tom, how do you hear me? Are you hearing me?
Just fine. Fine, Joe.
Oh, great. Happy birthday, Tom. I really wanted to call and weigh in and just tell you how much you've added to my life. It's amazing. Your show's just inspirational. I got a chance to speak to Senator, my congressman, Dave, thanks to you. It's just, you're inspirational. Now, on this topic of religion, I have 2 small children. My wife was raised in a very religious household. I think she was Pentecostal. We married. I was raised as a genetic Jew. We moved. We never lived by my mother-in-law until we had children. We had children, and then they got this attitude about wanting them, grandchildren, to be Christians. I didn't want that for my children because I didn't think they were old enough to make that determination. And I told my wife, I said, you know, I respect your mother and father, but I'd like for our children to make their decision on their own. And it became very contentious. It became very contentious because they would have nothing to do with, you know, letting my children not be exposed to their God, their Jesus.
Right.
And we moved away. And it's been unfortunate over the last, 10, 15 years that these Christian-loving parents, grandparents, have not picked up the phone to call their grandkids once. I never did that. I just didn't want them to be, should I say, brainwashed. I don't want to say that. That's not fair. Indoctrinated into that until they were ready for it.
Sure.
That being said, I recently had an opportunity to speak to Roe about reducing the age for voting. I think that the civic responsibility.
You're talking about Ro Khanna, your congressman.
Yes, because of the church's influence on kids is brainwashed at a young age. I feel maybe we should do this if we can in the schools to educate the electorate so that when they're 15 and 16, my daughter's taking, or I'm trying to get my daughter to take at your tutorial here, Advanced Placement U.S. History, so that she could better understand and make decisions on her own.
No, I'm with you.
Religion,
Joe. I think we really need to be teaching comparative religion in our schools, and that's something, by the way, that these right-wingers are typically very opposed to. Joe, I need to move along. I want to get a couple more calls in here before we wipe out this hour. Elizabeth in Albuquerque. Hey, Elizabeth.
Hello. I have been reading a book called God Against the Gods by Jonathan Kirsch, and he uses the term rigorism in that what happened when monotheism was kind of, when the first idea of a single God started, then we had a father who was responsible for everything, which reflects then the cultural idea of the patriarchy.
Sure. And sustains
it. And this part takes part around the time of Constantine. And his argument is that polytheism accepted every religion. And you were fine to do whatever religion you wanted. Whatever God you wanted to worship was just fine. Monotheism had an element in it which he calls rigorism. Rigorism means that you pick and choose and develop your idea of what God wants, and everybody else is wrong.
Right. That and that's the brilliant piece of the whole thing is that, everybody else must be wrong, right? Elizabeth, thank you for the call. That's fascinating stuff. We'll be right back. Interesting day. I got to tell you about what happened after an Airbnb stay.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
In the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading From American Holocaust by David Stannard, The Conquest of the New World. This is from the prologue. Just 21 years after Columbus's first landing in the Caribbean, the vastly populous island that the explorer had renamed Hispaniola was effectively desolate. Nearly 8 million people, those Columbus chose to call Indians, had been killed by violence, disease, and despair. It took a little longer, about the span of a single human generation, but what happened on Hispaniola was the equivalent of more than 50 Hiroshimas, and Hispaniola was only the beginning. Within no more than a handful of generations following their first encounters with the Europeans, the vast majority of the Western Hemisphere's native peoples had been exterminated. The pace and magnitude of their obliteration varied from place to place and from time to time, but for years, now historical demographers have been uncovering in region upon region post-Columbia depopulation rates of between 90 and 98%, with such regularity that an overall decline of 95% in Native American population has become a working rule of thumb. What this means is that, on average, for every 20 natives alive at the moment of European contact, when the lands of the Americans teemed with numerous tens of millions of people, only one stood in their place when the bloodbath was over. To put this in a contemporary context, the ratio of native survivorship in the Americas following European contact was less than half of what the human survivorship ratio would be in the United States today if every single white person and every single black person died. The destruction of the Indians of the Americas was far and away the most massive act of genocide in the history of the world. That is why, as one historian aptly has said, far from the heroic and romantic heraldry that customarily is used to symbolize the European settlement of the Americas, the emblem most congruent with reality would be a pyramid of skulls. Scholars estimate the size of the post-Columbian Holocaust have climbed sharply in recent decades. Too often, however, academic discussions of this ghastly event have reduced the devastated indigenous people and their cultures to statistical calculations in reconciling demographic analyses. It was easy for this to happen. From the very beginning, merely taking the account of so mammoth a cataclysm seemed an impossible task. Wrote one Spanish adventurer who arrived in the New World only 2 decades after Columbus's first landing, and who himself openly reveled in the torrent of native blood. There was neither, quote, paper nor time enough to tell all that the conquistadors did to ruin the Indians and rob them and destroy the land, end quote. As a result, the very effort to describe the disaster's overwhelming magnitude has tended to obliterate both the writer's and the reader's sense of its truly horrific human element. In an apparent effort to counteract this tendency, one writer, Tsvetsan Todorov, began his study of the events of 1492 and immediately thereafter with an epigraph from Diego de Landa's Relación de las Casas de Yucatán. Quote, the captain, Alonso López de Avila, brother-in-law of the Adelmento de Montejo, captured during the war in Bacalan a young Indian woman of lovely and gracious appearance. She had promised her husband, fearful lest they should kill him in the war, not to have relations with any other man but him, and so no persuasion was sufficient to prevent her from taking her own life to avoid being defiled by another man. And because of this, they had her thrown to the dogs. Toborov then dedicates his book to the memory of a Mayan woman devoured by dogs. It is important to try and hold in mind an image of that woman and her brothers and sisters and the innumerable others who suffered similar fates as one reads Todorov's book, or this one, or any other work on this subject, just as it is essential, as one reads about the Jewish Holocaust or the horrors of the African slave trade, to keep in mind the treasure of a single life in order to avoid becoming emotionally anesthetized by the sheer force of such overwhelming human evil and destruction. There is, for example, a case of a small Indian boy whose name no one knows today, and whose unmarked skeletal remains are hopelessly intermingled with those of hundreds of anonymous others in a mass grave on the American plains, but a boy who once played on the banks of a quiet creek in eastern Colorado, until the morning in 1864, when the American soldiers came. Then, as one of the cavalrymen later told it, while his compatriots were slaughtering and mutilating the bodies of all the women and all of the children they could catch, he spotted the boy trying to flee. Quote, "There was one child, probably 3 years old, just big enough to walk through the sand. The Indians had gone ahead and this little child was behind following after them. The little fellow was perfectly naked, traveling on the sand. I saw one man get off his horse at a distance of about 75 yards and draw up his rifle and fire, but he missed the child. Another man came up and said, 'Let me try the son of a bitch, I can hit him.' He got down off his horse, kneeled down and fired at the little child, but he missed him too. A third man came up and made a similar remark and fired, and the little fellow dropped." We must do what we can to recapture and try to understand in human terms what it was that was crushed, what it was that was butchered. It is not enough merely to acknowledge that much was lost. So close to total was the human incineration and carnage. And it continues.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Well, this I mentioned as we were hitting the break at the end of the last hour, an Airbnb stay. The story started out weird, and it's getting weird is the wrong word. The story started out bizarre, and it's getting even more bizarre. This, first of all, directed by Kells is the Facebook.com/directed by Kells is the person who posted this. And directed by Kells writes, during our time in California, we've been staying at an Airbnb. The 30th, that would be the last day of the month, right? The 30th was our second morning, and at about 11 a.m. we checked out. The four of us packed our bags, locked up the house, and left. As you can see, 3 of the 4 of us are black. About 10 seconds later, we were surrounded by 7 cop cars. The officers came out of their cars demanding we put our hands in the air. They informed us that there was also a helicopter tracking us. They had locked down the neighborhood and had us standing in the street. Why? A neighbor across the street saw 3 black people packing luggage into their car and assumed we were stealing from the house, so she called the police. At first, we joked about the misunderstanding and took photos and videos along the way, but about 20 minutes into this misunderstanding, it escalated almost instantly when their sergeant arrived. He explained that they didn't know what Airbnb was. He insisted we were lying about it and said we had to prove it. We showed them the booking confirmations, and we phoned the landlord because they didn't know what she looked like on the other end, so they wanted her to come down to see us. They detained us. Because they were investigating a felony charge, they detained us for 45 minutes while we figured it out, while they figured it out. We've been dealing with different emotions, and you want to laugh about this, but it's not funny. The trauma is real. I've been angry, frustrated, and sad. I was later detained at the airport. This is insanity. The cops admitted that the woman's reason for calling the police was because we didn't wave to her as she watched us putting our luggage into our car from her lawn. So that's part 1. Part 2, as what's his name would say on MSNBC, is that one of the 3 black people was the 33-year-old daughter of Bob Marley, Jamaican actress and filmmaker Denisha Pendergast. The granddaughter, she's the granddaughter of reggae legend Bob Marley. Maybe that'll help it get a little more, you know, visibility. In the live video, she says, "There's 4 police officers here. We watched your neighbor call the police. The police demanded that the owner appear in person to verify the identity of Pendergast, who apparently was the one who booked the accommodation." Right. Amazing. Meanwhile, if you want to see how corporations exercise power in the United States, there are still a few venues left where our elected officials who make decisions about the commons and make decisions about our lives and all that kind of stuff, there are still a few venues left where they actually have an obligation to listen to the public. Now, you remember, if Congress doesn't have that obligation, they just, you know, they can do like Mick Mulvaney bragged about, you know, hey, you know, if a lobbyist comes, if they give us money, then I'll listen to them. If they don't, then I won't. They could do like, you know, Paul Ryan has done and not do a single town hall for years, which might have something to do with why he's going to leave, because he knows otherwise he would be doing an Eric Cantor. Right? And in New Orleans, they have city council meetings, and they actually have to, the city council has to approve, if you're going to build a new power plant and it's going to blow a lot of pollution, particularly into poor neighborhoods like the East Side, the 9th Ward of New Orleans, if you're going to build a power plant there and dump more of your poison on the poor people, then, you know, there's got to be a city council meeting to decide whether to do this or not. Now, Entergy wants to build a power plant there. And, you know, as we all know, these power plants, they never go into affluent white neighborhoods. They always go into neighborhoods of people of color and or low-income neighborhoods. So about 50 people showed up to support this $210 million power plant. And Entergy will make some serious money off this thing, particularly if we let them, you know, dump their poison into our air and we don't charge them for it. So a bunch of people showed up and spoke on behalf of the power plant. Yeah, we'd like a power plant here. It would be great. Turns out, somebody was paying these people to speak. City Council in March approved this power plant by a vote of 6-1 after listening to public comments. And now what we know is that, well, this is from E.A. Crunden over at thinkprogress.org. The headline says it all. Actors were paid to attend New Orleans City Council meetings supporting power plant. They go on to say, several attendees told The Lens they were paid $60 to wear orange shirts and express support for the endeavor. Actors with speaking roles who read pre-written statements were reportedly paid $200. One told the publication he recognized as many as 15 other people in the audience as local performers. Keith Keogh says, they paid us to sit through the meeting and clap every time someone said something against wind and solar power. He said, I'm not political, but I needed the money. And then the guy apparently organizing this thing, he says, the council already supports it. This is mostly just to show that the citizens don't have a problem with it. Free pizza and a round of drinks after it's over, at which point pay will be dispersed in cash. I'm prepared to offer you a non-speaking role for $60 plus bonus potential. They met later on at the Dave & Buster's to be paid. So this is how craven, I mean, we're talking about the absolute lack of any kind of moral center or moral compass to people like Franklin Graham. And now we've got the same thing going on in corporate America, right? You know, yeah, sure, we'd love to pollute your neighborhood, and we know that you probably wouldn't like that, so we're just going to hire a bunch of actors to say, yeah, we would love, please come and pollute our neighborhood. Meanwhile, Facebook has decided that they're tired of being kicked around by right-wing trolls, and so they're going to bend over and kiss their butts. Seriously. Facebook has put together a conservative bias advising partnership, and they're going to look at how at liberal bias on Facebook. And so you would think it would be like you're going to have a conservative and a liberal, right? Or, you know, somebody from like the Columbia School of Journalism who doesn't characterize themselves as anything but, you know, understands journalism. No, that's not how it's going to work. It's going to be the Heritage Foundation. And it's going to be John Kyle, who works as a lobbyist. Now, he used to be the Republican senator from Arizona. He now works at Covington and Burlington, which is a big lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. And the Heritage Foundation and John Kyle are going to figure this out. This is insane. In 2011, John Kyle falsely claimed that 90% of Planned Parenthood services were for abortion. This is a guy, you know, he's a climate denier. This is a guy who does not have a close relationship with the truth. And so now the Heritage Foundation and John Kyle are going to be helping conservatives to censor Facebook. Aren't you reassured? A lot on the table here, a lot in the news. We'll continue this conversation in just a minute. It's coming up on 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Oh, and Senator Crapo is breaking campaign finance laws, according to Allied Progress. We'll get to that, too. And welcome back. McWayne in Chino Valley, Arizona. Hey, McWayne, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Yeah, Tom. Quickly, regarding Christianity, I must agree with Gandhi, who said, I like your Christ, but I'm not sure about your Christians.
Yeah, or what's the old joke? Christianity's a great idea. It'd be nice if somebody tried it.
There you go.
So that was it?
That was it.
Okay, well, that's a good one. McWayne, thanks for the call. I appreciate it. And thanks for watching the show. Shirley in Twin Falls, Idaho. Hey, Shirley, thank you for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Well, yes, I'm a United Methodist pastor, and I wanted to say some things about the religion. I think that they're all like worshiping the golden calf now, and they have forgotten about what Jesus taught us about taking care of people. And my definition of religion is, you know, God is love, and that we need to reach out to help the needy and the poor. And I can understand. I mean, I've been saying that the younger generation doesn't come to the church because they see the hypocrisy of, you know, we say one thing and then we do something else. So I think that's it. And like with Trump, I think also this whole thing, you know, they so-called, you know, some of them are backing him because he's pro-life. Well, I think the whole thing of the Republicans claiming to be pro-life is hypocritical, because maybe they are in the situation of abortion, but look at all the ways in, you know, rejecting health care.
Yeah, they're not pro-life, they're pro-birth.
Not feeding the children at, you know, cutting lunch programs. You know, I mean, the things with climate control, you know, you were saying, you know, here a while ago, 7 million children die around the world because of that, and they're opposing it. I mean, there are just hundreds of things that I think the Democrats should come out and say how hypocritical it is of them to claim to be pro-life, because they aren't.
Yeah, no, they are not pro-life, they are pro-birth, and you make the point so well that conservatives are worshiping the golden cow. You know, I was raised in the United Methodist Church. You're a pastor in the United Methodist Church. Surely we have just a little less than a minute left. What is the state of the church now?
Well, we're in flux because over the homosexual issue, so we'll find out over this next year. But, it depends upon the individual church. Some churches are really good at mission work. Some of them are really working with, their doors are always open to, like, AA and NA, and they're always involved with food banks. And, the church in Twin Falls, they give out hats and gloves and things. They just put them on the railing in front of the church. So anybody who comes in the wintertime and needs a hat or glove or a scarf, they can just take it. There's lots of churches that are doing mission work in our own country and around the world, And basically we go and work in orphanages and those kind of things. So, there are places that I think the real Christianity is at work, but, a lot of other places it really gets to be about money and power. And so, it's...
Tragically.
And I just wanted to say one other thing is I think the Democrats ought to come out and call the Republicans instead of conservative. I think that they are we are progressive and they are regressive. And I think
regressive or reactionary. I agree. Thank you, Shirley. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Oh, crapo, writes the fine folks over at Allied Progress. Actually, Patricia Snow apparently wrote this. Oh, crapo, Senator broke campaign finance law, took too much money from payday lender. Turns out Senator Crapo has been Senator Mike Crapo, the guy from, he's Idaho, right? I'm pretty sure. Has been taking money, his campaign flagged 2 donations from a payday lender as excessive contributions. This is the Federal Election Commission. They're saying, uh-oh. And Carl Frisch, the executive director of Allied Progress, he says, Senator Crapo could avoid problems like this if he would stop raising money from these unsavory financial bottom feeders who target those who can least afford it, trapping them in endless cycles of debt with 400% and 500% interest rates. The FEC flagged thousands of dollars in campaign cash that a payday lender gave Crapo. That money is the direct result of real suffering caused by this predatory industry. He goes on to say Crapo is deeply conflicted and cannot be trusted to do right by the American consumers. And then they go through all the details of who gave him money and when and all this kind of. It looks like Senator Crapo is not... is more interested in doing the bidding of the payday lenders than of his people. George in Chicago. Hey, George. Thanks for listening to CPT. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
A little earlier in the discussion when you were talking about various aspects of Christianity, it's coincidental with my reading a book by Chris Hedges and Joe Sacco that came out about 5 or 6 years ago called Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. And in it, he quotes a theologian, James Cone, in his book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, on how white Christianity and black Christianity, though they use the same iconography and language, are very different, and that people who are crucified in ways both large and small almost every days of their life, namely our fellow Americans who are black, perceive Christianity in a much more different way, and they see that the suffering and death on the cross is paralleled by their constant suffering and defeat, and that God's loving and transcendent presence will ultimately, hopefully, lead to some kind of redemption, whether here or in the next world. But it represents a flicker of hope in the middle of the worst kind of oppression and tyranny and sadness.
So your point is that white and black Christians view Christianity fundamentally differently?
I think so, because too many white Christian denominations are like they remind me of kingdoms where the founder passes on his kingdom to his inheritor, his son, like the Grahams and the Falwells.
Right.
And they're all about accruing worldly power
well,
and
also,
wealth.
yeah, I mean, you know, it's for white churches, you know, white parishioners, hey, we've got ours, right? We've got our white privilege, and so now let's talk about how, you know, the prosperity gospel, for example. Whereas, although the prosperity gospel is growing in black churches as well, as heretical as it may be in the minds of many of us, but there you've got church as an organizing principle around, you know, social issues, specifically civil rights, as it historically has been. You know, historically the church was a progressive social instrument. So that's interesting. George, thanks for
the point that really struck me strongly is, which I never really realized or saw before, is that in the eyes of a black Christian, the cross and a lynching tree are very much the same.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting point. George, thank you for that. Joe in Terre Haute, Indiana. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Hey, Tom, big fan. Great show today.
Thanks.
For the sake of time, I'll keep it short, but I experienced something the other day, a lot like that story that you told about Bob Marley's granddaughter.
Mm-hmm.
And I had made a Facebook post about it, and I just got crucified for, I mean, you know, saying that was racism. And I just think that nothing's really going to change as far as that goes until white people just kind of lose this denial that we're in, that it's actually still happening.
Yeah. What was the story you posted on Facebook, Joe?
Well, I was walking into it's the most popular store in the country the other day. There were a couple of black gentlemen standing out front.
This is a Walmart you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They just looked like they were waiting on somebody, so I went in. I was in there about 5 minutes. Walked out, and they were still standing there, no big deal. As I'm walking to my truck, I started walking up on this older white gentleman who actually happened to be wearing a Second Amendment is not negotiable T-shirt. And as I got close to him, he jumped like 3 feet in the air, like I scared him. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." And he said, "Oh, I just saw those two guys standing back there, you know, and they've been standing there a while, and I got kind of nervous. And I just kind of didn't know what to say, so I just walked to my truck, and I was like, man, that just made me sick to my stomach that guy just assumed that those guys were out there to do something to him."
Yeah. Well, and this is, you know, but that fearfulness is something that you would expect to see in somebody wearing a pro-Second Amendment T-shirt.
Yeah, I was glad he didn't have a gun.
Yeah. Well, and that's I mean, you know, there you go with, you know, the guy who killed Trayvon Martin. I mean, you know,
right, exactly.
There you go. Bob, thanks for the call, and thanks for sharing the story with us. You know, it's slowly we wake up. Unfortunately, way too slowly. But there is change coming. Change is happening. And it's I think, broadly speaking, a net positive change. Even change in the church.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
But in particular, we need a change in our government to say that we are not a government that is affiliated with any church or religion. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Elaine Pagel's book, The Gnostic Gospels. This is from chapter 3, God the Father, God the Mother. Unlike many of his contemporaries among the deities of the ancient Near East, the God of Israel shared his power with no female divinity, nor was he the divine husband or lover of any. He can scarcely be characterized in any but masculine epithets: king, lord, master, judge, and father. Indeed, the absence of feminine symbolism for God marks Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in striking contrast to the world's other religious traditions. Whether in Egypt, Babylonia, Greece, and Rome, or in Africa, India, and North America, which abound in female symbolism. Jewish, Christian, and Islamic theologians today are quick to point out that God is not to be considered in sexual terms at all, yet the actual language they use daily in worship and prayer conveys a completely different message. Who, growing up Jewish or Christian tradition, has escaped the distinct impression that God is masculine? And while Catholics revere Mary as the mother of Jesus, they never identify her as divine in her own right. If she is the mother of God, she is not God the Mother, on an equal footing with God the Father. Christianity, of course, added the Trinitarian terms to the Jewish description of God, yet of the three divine persons, two, the Father and the Son, are described in masculine terms, and the third, the Spirit, suggests the sexlessness of the Greek neuter term for spirit, pneuma. Whoever investigates the early history of Christianity, the field called patristics, that is, study of the fathers of the church, will be prepared for the passage that concludes the Gospel of Thomas. Simon Peter said to the disciples, "Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life." Jesus said, "I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman will make herself male, who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven." End of quote from the Gospel of Thomas. Strange as it sounds, this simply states what religious rhetoric assumes, that the men form the legitimate body of the community while women are allowed to participate only when they assimilate themselves to men. Other texts discovered at Nag Hammadi demonstrate one striking difference between these heretical sources and the orthodox ones. Gnostic sources continually use sexual symbolism to describe God. One might expect that these texts would show the influence of archaic pagan traditions of the mother goddess, but for the most part, their language is specifically Christian, unmistakably related to a Jewish heritage. Yet instead of describing a monastic and masculine God, many of these texts speak of God as a dyad who embraces both masculine and feminine elements. One group of Gnostic sources claims to have received a secret tradition from Jesus through James and through Mary Magdalene. Members of this group prayed to both the Divine Father and Mother. Quote, "From thee, Father, and through thee, Mother, the two immortal names, parents of the divine being, and thou, dweller in heaven, humanity, of the mighty name." The end of the quote from the prayer. Other texts indicate that the authors had wondered to whom a single masculine God proposed, quote, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness," in Genesis 1:26. Since the Genesis account goes on to say that humanity was created, quote, "male and female," some concluded that the God in whose image we are made must also be both masculine and feminine, both father and mother. How do these texts characterize the Divine Mother? I find no simple answer, since the texts themselves are extremely diverse. Yet we may sketch out three primary characterizations. In the first place, several Gnostic groups describe the Divine Mother as part of an original couple. Valentinius, the teacher and poet, begins with the premise that God is essentially indescribable. But he suggests that the divine can be imagined as a dyad, consisting in one part of the ineffable, the depth, the primal Father, and in the other of grace, silence, the womb, and mother of all. Valentinius reasons that silence is the appropriate complement of the Father, designating the former as feminine and latter as masculine because of the grammatical gender of the Greek words. He goes on to describe how silence receives, as in a womb, the seed of the ineffable source. From this she brings forth all the emanations of a divine being, ranged in harmonious pairs of masculine and feminine energies. Followers of Valentinius prayed to her for protection as the mother and as the mystical eternal silence. For example, Marcus, the magician, invokes her as grace, in Greek the feminine term charis. Quote, "May she who is before all things, the incomprehensible and indescribable grace, fill you within and increase in you her own knowledge." End of quote from the Gospels. In his secret celebration of the Mass, Marcus teaches that the wine symbolizes her blood. As the cup of wine is offered, he prays that grace may flow into all who drink it. A prophet and visionary, Marcus calls himself the womb and recipient of silence, as she is of the Father. The visions he received of the divine being appeared, he reports, in female form. Another Gnostic writing, called the Great Announcement, quoted by Hippolytus in his Refutation of All Heresies, explains the origin of the universe as follows. Quote, "From the power of silence appeared a great power, the mind of the universe, which manages all things, and is a male. The other, a great intelligence, is a female which produces all things. Following the gender of the Greek words for mind and intelligence, this author explains that these powers joined in union and are discovered to be in duality. The book, The Gnostic Gospels, by Elaine Pagels. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Rick in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Rick, thanks for listening to 1350 AM there in Albuquerque. What's up?
Oh, you were talking about salvation, right?
And
well, they got it all wrong. Salvation's not forever. If that was true, I could rob a bank today or something like that. It don't make any sense.
Well, that seems to be the argument that Franklin Graham is making, is that, you know...
Well, I'll tell you what. Read Romans chapter 8, okay?
Yeah.
Read verses 12 to 13, right? He basically says this, brethren, that's to follow church members. He says, if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit, you will put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. So that salvation is not forever, because he says you will live, else or you will die.
Yeah. No, I think that there's a broad consensus that Franklin Graham is not, and thanks for that call, is not theologically competent here. Liz in West Hollywood, California. Hey, Liz, what's up?
Hi. Oh, excuse me. I just want to wish you a happy birthday.
Well, thank you.
I'm calling about if Christians were true Christians, there would be no need for abortion, because every child that was in need of a home would be in a good Christian home, no matter how physically disabled, how mentally disabled they are. AIDS babies, drug babies, the whole Megillah. But my experience is that most of these people just want to tell you how to live your life and don't want to put up.
Yeah.
And they should be put up or shut up.
Okay, I got it. And don't disagree. Bart in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Bart, what's up?
Yeah, you have two points I'd like to make, John, if I may. The first one is religions have killed more people in this world than any even war that has been declared by nations. That's number one. Number two, vis-a-vis abortion and the government. The self-named pro-lifers are saying that life begins at inception when you hear the heartbeat after a couple of weeks. Well, if that's the case, I'd like to see them propose a law that says that once they hear the heartbeat, the parents of the infant should be given a Social Security card for that infant, which would then give a jump start to the individual in getting their Social Security almost a year earlier than they would be.
Yeah, they would be very upset about that. Oh my God, we just lowered the Social Security retirement age. But beyond that, Bart, I don't want to give these guys any ideas, because I think that they would probably go with that, and that's a pretty rough one. Bart, thanks for the call. John in Danbury, Connecticut. Hey, John, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I just got in the car a minute ago, and I heard tail end of your program there for a second. I think you're referring to this proposal to put a religious office for religious issues in the White House?
No, although that's another issue. What got me started on all this was that we've got a state, and I had to pull the article out to see which state it was. Mm-hmm. I think it's West Virginia, that is proposing a day of prayer throughout their schools, imposing prayer in their. This is a debate that we had in '62 and '63. Went to the Supreme Court. And apparently the religious right has decided, or the Republican Party has decided, that this is something they can win on again. Although back then, the subtext to it was that they were aggressively shutting down public schools rather than integrate them. So, it's still all contaminated with race. But back to you, John.
My point was that if I heard something the other day, and I thought you were talking about when I got in the car. I only heard at the tail end of your what you were saying before you went for a break. But if they do institute an office of religious whatever in the White House, we have to make sure they have an imam.
Sure.
Okay.
And somebody from the Satanic Temple and and somebody from that. But yeah, they should be representatives of all the religions. This is why, and John, thank you, well said. This is why I keep saying, if you want religion in schools, I'm all in favor of it. I am absolutely all in favor of it. We should be teaching comparative religion in our schools. We should be comparing the creation myths of Christianity to the creation myths of Hinduism, to the creation myths of pantheism, to the creation myths of the Vikings and Thor and all those guys, to the creation myths of the Greeks. We should be teaching how Zoroastrianism, you can draw a straight line from Zoroastrianism to Christianity. We should be teaching the history of these religions. But instead, no, these guys, they just want to have a debate about, who's in charge, basically, is what it comes down to. April in Portland, Oregon. Hey, April, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's up?
Hey, thanks, Tom. Your conversation today about religion made me think of the book by Raul Martinez called Creating Freedom. Are you familiar with it?
I'm not familiar with it.
It's phenomenal. I've only just started it, but one of his basic premises in the first chapter, which is entitled The Lottery of Birth, is that, none of us choose to be born with certain genetics or into the environment that we're born into, right? So ultimately, we don't, because those things determine who we become to a great degree, we don't hold ultimate responsibility for our choices. It's a powerful and paradigm-shifting idea, but he says, if we were to just destroy this myth of responsibility, we could completely change our criminal injustice system, and the whole way that we operate, because the people, the uber rich, the billionaires, don't deserve what they have. No one really gets credit or blame for what they have done.
Well, and
really interesting.
Extending that, April, there was some just shocking studies done back in the 70s and 80s, and I'm assuming that this research has continued. Dean Radin writes about some of it in his book Quantum Entanglement, that shows that if you are presented with a choice, before you realize or before you think you've made that decision, you've already decided. And,
exactly.
And so, it literally calls into question the idea of free will, period. And that's pretty foundational stuff, to be rattling. But
it is. And I encourage you and your listeners to pick up the book Creating Freedom by Raul Martinez, because he takes that idea and, it's just intuitively wrong to us, I think, most of us. But he really makes the argument that this isn't an argument for fatalism. It's not about that. It's about once we are informed that really, people in India, people in America, we didn't choose this, right? And it really informs who we become. Then we can go from there, and once we understand that, we can make more informed choices about our society, about our economic system, about everything else. And I really think it could change the world, and there's actually a documentary film about it, which I didn't find all that well made, but I would encourage people to look into it.
Great. Okay, I'll check it out. April, thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing that suggestion. Fred in Los Angeles. Hey, Fred, what's up?
Hi. First of all, happy birthday to you.
Thank you, Fred.
I won't say any more because I don't want to get in and step on anybody's copyrighted. Well, Tom's copyrighted. Since you're on religion and God, I wanted to make a point about God that just recently occurred to me. It's a little tongue-in-cheek. If life is nothing but a joke, then God must be the comedy writer.
Yeah. There you go. Well, and I think that a lot of our comedy writers are more godly than a lot of the so-called preachers out there. Well said. Cliff in Midlothian, Virginia. Hey, Cliff, what's up?
How are things going, Tom?
Good.
Tom, I want to bring to your attention the eulogy being done today of Reverend James Cone, who was the premier theologian, African-American theologian, black theologian, who coined the concept of liberation theology and black theology. He talked in terms of prophetic ministry, and he said that if God does not support the oppressed people and support those who are who's having injustice done to them, then God is a racist. So he flipped the script in terms of defining who God takes a side with.
Sure.
Based on the Old Testament, with the prophets of the Old Testament, who always sided with the oppressed or those who were being treated inequitably.
Well, in the
And I
New
think-
Testament as well. That's the story of both
And the New
books.
Testament, right. But the prophetic ministry and his liberation theology ought to be talked about, because here's a guy who's 40-plus years teaching at Union Theological Seminary, is not being acknowledged anywhere in the main press, on the main media. And he's clearly one of the great thinkers who coined Dr. King's and Malcolm and blended the two into a theology that needed to purify all of us.
Fascinating, fascinating. Cliff, thanks for that.
So James Cone.
I got it. James Cone, thank you very much. Alex in Edison, New Jersey. Hey, Alex, I got a minute to the break. A quick one.
Okay, I'll be quick. Numbers chapter 5, verses 11 through 30. About how to give an abortion. Read it in the Old Testament.
You're talking the Book of Numbers. If you're talking about what I'm thinking you're talking about, it's where it defines how much a man has to pay if he hurts a woman in a way that causes her to miscarry. Am I remembering it right?
Yeah, if it's his, then maybe it'll be okay. If not, then the woman has to drink whatever. And
oh yeah, that was the whole who's really the father of this child kind of test and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, again.
Yeah, the Bible, it reflects a 3,000-year-old culture, and the norms of society change over time, and they certainly change over millennia. Alex, thanks for the call. Interesting. Okay, in 4 minutes from now, Bob Ney will be with us with Talk Media News to fill us in on what's going on in the world today. We will check in on that. And in the meantime, stick around. What are the biggest economic problems we're facing? I'd say, the theft of democracy is actually an economic problem.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
But we'll be back with more right after this. Stick around. And welcome back. Jack in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Jack, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yeah, you betcha. Listen, I got a couple of minor things. First, I have a historical question. When we first started having elections, did or did not, the winner of the election became president. Didn't the person who came in second become vice president?
Yes, until the Constitution was amended, and I think that would have been during Jefferson's presidency, but it might have been a little after that. But yeah.
Okay. Well, I just think that given today's divisiveness between the Democrats and the Republicans, wouldn't it be a relatively good idea, maybe, to go back to that? In that,
I don't know. That's how Jefferson ended up with Aaron Burr as his vice president. Which he was not. As for that matter, that's how John Adams ended up with Thomas Jefferson as vice president, and they hated each other.
Yeah. Well, I just think it might tend to soothe some of the things that are going on, between the Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just one of those thoughts that crossed my head.
I think if you want to soothe the differences.
When I went to college, though, I did take philosophy and theology as a minor, and one of the lines that I forget who made it, but man is supposed to be created in God's own image. And this one author that I read, I don't know if it was Camus or I don't think it was Camus, but the line was, man has created God in his own image. This is vanity, but man prefers vanity to understanding.
Yeah, it sort of sounds like Albert Camus.
Okay, yeah. And
wouldn't surprise me.
Secondly, in terms of race and all that, racism, I'm from the Metro New York area, and I married a black Puerto Rican from the South Bronx, and there was one time I had occasion to walk into a McDonald's on 125th Street in the Bronx, and everybody, it was totally filled with black people, which I have obviously no problem with. My parents brought me up that everybody was equal. Anyway, the entire people that are black people that are in the McDonald's turned around to look at me, and like, what's this white guy doing here? And it was an incredible experience for me, because I realized what a lot of black people go through when they walk into a room, and they're not recognized or something like that. That's basically it.
We could all use some serious walking a mile in their shoes kind of activities.
Exactly. And one other comment: somebody like Huckabee, when he was running for president, I don't think a religious person or somebody that claims to be religious should be eligible for a public office like that.
I agree with you, and so did Thomas Jefferson. Jack, thanks for the call. So let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Alan Ratner's new book. And on the line with us, the author of Sideswiped, former Congressman Bob Ney. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom.
So what's up in the world today, Bob?
Well, let's go towards Iran first, if we could, today. The president has sent out a tweet, and it's based on former Secretary of State Kerry, former Senator Kerry, John Kerry. And in that tweet, the president alludes to potential illegal shadow diplomacy. And
wasn't John Kerry wasn't John Kerry involved in the initial negotiations for the Iran deal?
Of course. He sure was.
Yeah,
He was Secretary of State. Javad Zarif was the foreign, and it still is, the foreign minister of Iran, and they were both involved publicly at the tables, of course.
Right.
And what the president's talking about, there was a meeting in Oslo, and at that meeting, Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, happened to be present, and Senator Kerry. There's also been some conversations with Senator Kerry and some European leaders. Now, the president's, quoting, basically is alluding to the Logan Act, of which in its history, one person has been indicted under the Logan Act, and the Logan Act means that an American citizen, even if they're elected, an American citizen cannot interfere with foreign policy decisions, agreements, etc. It's basically the Logan Act. And again, one indictment, no convictions ever in its long history.
Right.
Now, I would refer to the letter of the 47, I think there were at least that amount of senators, and it was penned by Senator Cotton of Arkansas to the Iranians at the time, basically saying, if we want to talk about a potential violation of the Logan Act, that if you, the Iranians, approve this Iran deal with Barack Obama, we, the Congress, will in fact not be part of legitimizing this. Therefore, you will have, their inference is a deal that's not worth the paper it's written on.
Right.
So if anybody wants to look at the potential of the Logan Act, that sure sat in the other direction of what the Logan Act was meant to be. And, of course, they basically, a lot of them pulled out of that letter. But I just wanted to mention the Kerry situation because, having a conversation on an act that he was intricately involved with to create in no way is something shadowy or illegal. He's a continued part of that. So, and this is all on the heels, of course. That's
so what is the illegality that Trump is proposing John Kerry committed?
What Trump is alluding to in his tweet is that it was shadow diplomacy, illegal shadow diplomacy.
What the hell does that mean?
Well, the president's tweets. What it means from the president's end of it, we believe, is that John Kerry is out there trying to be interfering in Trump's decision, trying to have some kind of interference.
Oh, he's upset because John Kerry is speaking out publicly in favor of the Iran deal? And he's calling that a violation of the Logan Act?
Yes.
Oh,
What
geez.
he's basically doing. It's shadow diplomacy in his tweet.
And what did Netanyahu do last week?
Oh, Netanyahu, yes, he came here and obviously did everything under the sun to attempt to take the deal apart.
Well, his little TV dog and pony show and everything.
Old information,
Yeah.
as everybody knows, including, you've got Senator from Tennessee who is still chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee saying this is nothing new.
Yeah.
But this is all building up towards this May 12th decision our president has. And Europe, by the way, today announced that no matter what we do, they are staying in the agreement.
Right.
So
I have a feeling we're just going to end up, odd man out on this thing, but
sure we are.
We'll see. So what else is going on in the world?
But also people, do warn that then there's this perception of Iran that we can't, look what they're doing, and the John Boltons of the world would want to try to create a war.
Well, and if we end up odd man out on the Iran deal, that's going to really hurt. I would think that's going to hurt chances of negotiating something with North Korea.
Absolutely.
But these guys are not thinking in the context of anything other than if Obama did it, it's got to be undone.
It's got to be undone. The prison reform is very interesting because this is a bill that even Representative Meadows, who's head of the Freedom Caucus, the Tea Party end of the Republicans, has said that there are some sweet points to these pieces of legislation. Senator Grassley in the Senate has also said that he wants to take up sentencing reform because there are certain guidelines that a judge has to then impose certain sentencing guidelines on more minor crimes and therefore give longer periods of time of incarceration. Under this proposal that's winding its way through the House, Tom, there'll be 4,000 some people that will actually be eligible to be released who, were serving way too long types of sentences. But also there's some more guts to the prison reform. Now, some members of Congress, like Representative Nadler of New York, feel that there's more to do, but he still feels that this is a great step forward in the process. Now, the interesting thing about this, you have the White House who had talked about prison reform. You have the House and Senate in a great bipartisan basis with some arguments to come yet in the Senate over the sentencing packages, mandatory sentencing reform, which I think is good to take up. But you have the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, coming out against this bill.
That's interesting. Now, when this issue first came up a couple of years back and it was being promoted by the Koch brothers, their centerpiece was changing the definitions of mens rea, which is the Latin word for state of mind. And what they wanted to do was make it so that if, as the CEO of, say, for example, a refinery, you were to spend millions of dollars trying to convince people that there's no such thing as global warming, if your intention was only to increase your profits, if that was your mens rea, right, that was what was in your mind, then there's nothing wrong with that. You can't be convicted. As opposed to if your intention was to lie to people in order to kill the earth. And a lot of us thought that this whole sentencing reform thing was a way to change the mens rea laws so that they could make it much, much harder to go after polluters.
Interesting.
Do you know if mens rea is still part of it?
I don't know that. I'll have to check.
Well, that's the thing to look for, because it looked to me like what the Koch brothers really wanted was to make it almost impossible to prosecute people like them, and wrap this in the cloth of, we're going to help these poor people in prison.
Right.
Anyhow, Bob Ney with Talk Media News. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from my book, We the People, A Call to Take Back America, which was published back in 2004. This was during the Bush administration. It's an illustrated nonfiction book, and this is from the chapter titled They're Back, page 84. Today, the conservatives are set to complete what the railroad barons pushed the Grant administration to start. That would have been in the 1880s, to take democracy and its institutions of governance, which the founders fought and died for, from the hands of humans, citizens, and voters. They're handing control to the very types of monopolistic corporations the founders fought against when they led the Tea Party revolt against the East India Company in Boston Harbor in 1773. In June of 2003, despite protests from millions of Americans, corporate-friendly Michael Powell's FCC lifted some of the last tattered restrictions on media ownership, allowing absolute concentration of the voices we hear into a tiny number of corporate hands. On another front, a major multinational corporation has claimed the right to deceive people in its PR as its First Amendment right to free speech. The New York Times Corporation editorialized in support. Even the ACLU, unable to see the forest for the trees, adopted a misguided advocacy seeking to preserve First Amendment rights, even for corporations who don't legitimately warrant them. In addition, as much as half the federal workforce is slated to be replaced by corporate workers under a new Bush edict. Keep in mind this was 2004. Government, which doesn't have constitutional human rights of privacy and so is answerable to we the people, will then, once big chunks of government are privatized, will then be able to use Fourth Amendment rights of privacy to hide what those workers do and how they do it from the prying eyes of citizens and voters. In a similar fashion, corporate-owned and thus unaccountable to the people voting machines are being installed nationwide. In the last election, these machines often produced vote results so different from exit polls that pollsters who have been successfully calling elections for over 50 years threw their hands up and closed shop. And in the ultimate irony, the man in charge of the Bush administration's economic policy, Secretary of Treasury John Snow, is a multimillionaire campaign contributor, chairman of the Business Roundtable, an elite core of 100 of the nation's most powerful corporate CEOs, and himself a railroad baron. It's a sorry state of affairs, and it shouldn't be that way. Corporations are created by humans to further the goal of making money. And as engineer, architect, and writer Buckminster Fuller said in his brilliant essay, Grunch of Giants, corporations are neither physical nor metaphysical phenomena. They are socioeconomic ploys, legally enacted game playing. Corporations are non-living, non-breathing legal fictions. They feel no pain. They don't need clean water to drink, fresh air to breathe, healthy food to consume. They can live forever. They can't be put in prison. They can change their identity or appearance in a day. They can change their citizenship in an hour. They can rip off parts of themselves and create entirely new entities. Some have compared corporations to robots in that they are human creations that can outlive individual humans, performing their assigned tasks forever. Scientist and prolific author Isaac Asimov, when considering a world where robots had become as functional and intelligent as, and more powerful than, their human creators, posited 3 fundamental laws that would determine the behavior of such potentially dangerous human-made creations. His 3 laws of robotics stipulated that non-living creations must obey humans and never behave in a way that would harm humans. In some famous fictional scenarios, we see the consequences of letting human creations operate without adequate restrictions or limitations. In Arthur C. Clarke's 2001, the onboard computer HAL seizes control of the spaceship from the humans therein. The Terminator film series depicts a time when human-built machines wage war against humanity itself. And in the Matrix films, machines use humans much as we now use them. Asimov's idea was profound, but not altogether original, of course. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison beat him to it by about 200 years with an idea that a constitutional amendment was needed to ensure that the reach of corporations was limited. Something seems to have slipped since then. Until 1886, it was a felony in most states for corporations to give money to politicians or otherwise try, through either lobbying or advertising, to influence elections. Such activity was called bribery and influencing. And the reason it was banned was simple. Corporations can't vote, so what are they doing in politics? And numerous additional laws were passed to restrain corporations from involvement in politics during the era of President Teddy Roosevelt, who said there can be no effective control of corporations while their political activity remains. In Wisconsin, for example, the penalty for any corporate official violating the law and getting cozy with politicians on behalf of the corporation was 5 years in prison and a substantial fine. Prior to 1886, corporations were referred to in U.S. law as artificial persons, similar to the way Star Trek portrays a human-looking robot named Data. Like Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, state laws like that of Wisconsin prevented corporations from harming humans while still allowing people to create their robots, their corporations, and use them to make money. The Wisconsin law said no corporation doing business in this state shall pay or contribute or offer consent or agree to pay or contribute directly or indirectly any money, property, free service of its officers, employees, or thing of value to any political party, organization, committee, or individual for any political purpose whatsoever. We the people.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the book.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with me, Ambassador Ira Shapiro. He is the president of Shapiro Global Strategies, international trade lawyer, former staffer to U.S. senators from Robert Byrd to Jay Rockefeller, the author of The Last Great Senate, Courage and Statesmanship in Times of Crisis, and most recently, Broken, Can the Senate Save Itself and the Country? ShapiroGlobal.com is his website, and you can tweet him at Shapiro Global. Ambassador, welcome to the program.
Well, Tom, it's good to be with you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. I found your article over at Real Clear Politics fascinating. This whole idea that we used to have Democratic centrists and Republican centrists who got together and did things that actually worked for the country. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, Tom, I wrote about, my first book was about the Senate of the 1960s and 70s, going right up through the end of the 70s. The parties were closer together then. They were more, not as ideologically divided, far apart. But the other thing about it was these were people who actually understood the need to try to solve the nation's problems. And they really engaged very substantially on the whole range of serious issues. What we've seen in recent years is the exact opposite. Not only are the parties much further apart ideologically, but there's been no effort to engage and seriously solve problems. All we have is tribal politics, practiced particularly strongly by Senator McConnell.
Yeah, and to the detriment, I would say, of the entire nation, particularly when you consider what he did with Merrick Garland. It strikes me that 40, 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago, I'd say right up until really in a big way the Reagan era, that you had politicians who were reactive and responsive to special interests, to corporate interests, to the interests of the wealthy, but they weren't owned by them to the extent that they are today. So you could have, Democrats and Republicans, for example, in the late 60s, early 70s, having a debate about how much we should clean up our air and our water, but not having a debate about whether or not there was even, a scientific reality of dirty air or dirty water. Whereas now you've got Republicans unwilling to even acknowledge the scientific reality of climate change because they are a wholly owned subsidiary now of the fossil fuel industry. And, industry after industry after industry, you can go through and find that these are not, for example, net neutrality. The vast majority of Republicans want net neutrality, but not to mention Democrats, but voters. But if you look at the elected officials who are taking money from the big, internet service providers and the big telco companies to a person, they are opposed to net neutrality, and they cloak it in all kinds of BS language, but we all know it's BS language. Isn't that the real issue that in 1976, when the Supreme Court in the Buckley decision said that if a corporation or a billionaire wants to own a politician, that's considered free speech? That had never been the case prior to 1976 in the history of the United States. And then they cemented that with Citizens United in 2010.
I certainly think you're right about how harmful those decisions were. But I also think if you look at it, Tom, what you see, even after the Buckley decision, you see senators and Republican senators throughout much of the 80s still pretty good public servants, pretty aware of their obligations to balance corporate interest and the public interest. They had pretty good environmental records, for example. Sometime, whether you make it the late 80s, the early 90s, the Republican Party keeps going right. And Newt Gingrich was a crucial participant in this. He was the catalyst for a lot of it. And politics became not only what's called the permanent campaign, but increasingly unwillingness to compromise and unwillingness to look at the public interest. And when I look at the last 30 years, I would say that two key people who've had great influence were Newt Gingrich and Mitch McConnell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, you could go back and look at the caucus room conspiracy, the night, January 20th, yes. 2009, that night that, and Robert Draper wrote the book about this when the Tea Party came to town, when President Obama and his wife were, newly inaugurated, dancing at the balls in D.C. You had 14 or 17 members of Congress getting together with Newt Gingrich and Frank Luntz in the caucus room restaurant. I used to live on the backside of that building, and basically vowing to each other that they were going to destroy the Obama presidency, no matter even issues that they had historically completely agreed with him on. They were not going to allow him to have any victories. He was going to have a failed presidency, and Gingrich bragged about.
Exactly right. And in addition to the book you referred to, I encourage people just to look at McConnell's own memoir, where he talks about convening the Senate Republicans for their strategy session and figuring out how to take down the president. And he paints a picture of a dark, bleak, rainy day, and everyone is depressed. They weren't depressed that the country was facing an economic catastrophe. They were depressed that a Democrat had become president.
Right.
I can't think of a more shameful act by a leader than the effort that he made and to mobilize his people, all the Republicans, against the economic stimulus that was so desperately needed.
So if we look at policy, if we look at the level of policy, in the Democratic Party, take health care, for example, there's a robust debate among Democrats about whether we should, come up with a stronger, new and improved version of Obamacare, or whether we should simply go with single-payer health care. But on both sides, the consensus, the absolute opinion on both sides of that debate is we want to get as much health care to as many people as possible at the lowest price possible. And, it's just a question of what's politically viable or feasible. Whereas on the Republican side, I don't think that there's any consensus that people are even entitled to health care or should have health care. You know, they won't even acknowledge things like the public health crisis. You know, I mean, every other developed country in the world, their health care system, their single-payer health care or the equivalent of it, is part of their public health. You know, so if they have an outbreak of you know, the 1919 pandemic flu or something, that they're ready for it. I mean, they literally won't have that conversation or any other conversation because they want to make sure to protect the profits of you know, the healthcare industry, the health insurance industry. You got people like Stephen J. Hemsley, the CEO of United Healthcare, who's taken over $1 billion in compensation for that company. They own a bunch of politicians. How you know? Do you think that I'm overstating it to say that there is basically no legitimacy with regard to these major issues where the Republicans are simply refusing to even have a reasonable conversation? Economics also, you know, the whole trickle-down economics, still pretending that it's a thing, you know, and when it's over and over and over again been proven to be BS. Whereas on the Democratic side, there's actually still debates about, okay, how do we get to free college for everyone? How do we get to health care for everyone? How do we get to, you know, a strengthened Social Security system? It seems to me increasingly that to even call the Republican Party legitimate does a disservice to this discussion.
I think the central, unfortunately, I think the central part of our politics over the last 30 years has been the move from the Republican Party from being a respectable sort of center-right party to a party that doesn't believe in government and doesn't accept the results of elections unless they win them. So if you look back in the 80s and even the 90s, you could see Republicans who were engaging on the issue of health care, whether it was Chafee from Rhode Island or Durenberger from Minnesota,
Mitt Romney,
or Orrin Hatch. These were people who were trying to figure out something on health care. When Obama reached out to Republicans on health care, a couple of them sort of listened to him for a while, but McConnell basically talked them out of it. Yep. And he says as much in his memoir. He sort of beat them into line. So they don't engage on any of the issues. And at this point, for someone like me who talks about bipartisanship, I have to acknowledge the difficulty of bipartisanship if one party isn't going to engage at all.
Right.
The answer there is very crushing defeats in elections.
Yeah. And you know, from your lips to God's ears. I mean, let's hope that that's what's coming down the road. Ambassador Ira Shapiro, ShapiroGlobal.com is the website. You can tweet him at Shapiro Global. His most recent book, Broken, Can the Senate Save Itself in the Country? Before that, The Last Great Senate. Ambassador, thank you for dropping by today.
Tom, you're a great spokesman for progressive values and policies. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to hear that from you. Thank you very much, sir. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So how do we walk back the damage that the Republican Party is doing to our country? And welcome back. And let's see here, Scott in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Scott, thanks for listening. What's up?
Hey, how's it going, Tom? Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you,
Oh,
Scott.
many more, my friend. You're my 3 hours of calm and common sense in the day.
Okay. So what's up?
I was just wondering, you made a mention about Barack Obama's big lie about the doctor. And I was just watching a movie the other night. It was called The Company You Keep. And the guy in there, he was an investigative reporter, and he was explaining, he said, there's two reasons people lie. He goes, one is because you just don't know. You think you know, you're telling something that you think you're sure of, and it just isn't right. And he said the other reason is to just plain deceive. And, you know, it's like being able to tell the difference between them two it seems to be kind of a big deal now.
Yeah. Yeah. I know, looking back on my life, the times when I have lied have almost always been when I felt like I needed to impress somebody. It always comes out of some fundamental insecurity. And, I'm wary about psychoanalyzing people or projecting my own psychopathologies on others, but I suspect that that's a common thing. And I suspect that an awful lot, if not the vast majority of Donald Trump's lies, come out of the fundamental insecurity that he experienced growing up with a distant father and a very distant mother who, sent him off to military school, spring, fall, fall, winter, and spring, and then during the summer, when he was home, she went to Scotland because she couldn't stand to be around him or whatever.
Yeah.
What do you think, Scott?
Well, yeah, could be. It's just to impress, and I don't know. I just don't understand it. It just, you'd think people would be able to see with their own eyes, but
yeah.
Apparently not.
You would think, yeah. Thanks a lot for the call, Scott. Good to hear from you. Colleen in Kent, Washington. Hey, Colleen, what's on your mind?
Good morning and happy birthday.
Thank you.
You had earlier made reference to the Freeman Foundation, and I'm a retired teacher. And when I was teaching, I got emails both at home and at work from the Freeman Foundation that tried to convince me that the teachers union, like the WEA in this case, did not serve us, and that we should not join nor have any monies with them. Can you elucidate on that?
Well, Freeman is one of these right-wing foundations that goes out there and tries to convince workers that the employer is always right, kind of thing?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and especially, as far as I know, has it in for teachers' unions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's unfortunate. There's a bunch of these, and they're all funded by wealthy people who basically don't like unions and who believe, in this kind of NeoCalvinism that hey, we're the rich guys, so we're the ones who know what's best, and it's terrible. Colleen, thanks for the call. Thanks for the information. I did not realize that they were all about trashing teachers, but I'm not surprised. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So, I want to revisit this one whole issue of Donald Trump, starting in 2006, absolutely altered his business plans, the way that he does business. Prior to 2006, he always used other people's money and bank money, and put his name on things, but he would leverage things And, you know, it's the way that you make more money faster, right? Then he had all these bankruptcies. And starting in 2006, he started paying cash for things. Apparently, according to the reporting that we're seeing, $400 million in cash. His son, Eric, is on the record saying that $100 million of that came from Russian oligarchs. And of course, then you've got the Kazakhstan and the this stan and that stan, and, you know, it's all these other countries. So here's the question. If the case that Robert Mueller puts together, if that case comes out to be that Donald Trump is owned by foreign oligarchs, billionaires from other countries, whether it's Russia or Uzbekistan or, you know, Slovenia or whatever it might be, although it's looking like a lot of them would be from Russia. If it turns out and has the evidence that would satisfy the average American, that Donald Trump and his family, the entire Trump crime family, that they are owned by foreign forces. And the reason why Donald Trump has been going so easy on Russians is because he is owned by foreign forces. You know, hey, let's try and do away with the Magnitsky Act and all this kind of stuff. Is that, if that's the case, if this is what comes out, instead of, you know, oh my God, he was having sex with a porn star and trying to hide it from his wife and the rest of the country, what if instead it's what he's been trying to hide from us isn't just that he's not a billionaire, but he's actually broke, which I think many of us have been assuming for at least a decade or two. And we know now that back in the 80s and 90s when he was claiming to be a billionaire, he was, at the first Forbes list, he was only worth $5 million. And that was before the bankruptcies. But if what it turns out is that Donald Trump owes $400 million to a bunch of foreign oligarchs, and we've seen, I mean, you know, Jared Kushner was, you know, his sister was over there in China making the sales pitch, hey, if you invest in the Kushner properties, you can get a green card to go to the United States. And basically selling green cards. You just have to invest a minimum of $1 million, I think it was, or maybe it was like $500,000 or whatever it was. So we've got, I mean, the Kushners have been nailed, basically, you know, pay for play with citizenship or green cards and things. But what if Trump has been doing that in a big way all this time? Is that going to be enough for Americans to say, whoa, that is inappropriate, we don't want this guy, you know, we want to impeach this guy? Or does it take sex, right? It was like, you know, at least for the Republicans, all this sturm and drang around Bill Clinton, oh my God, he had sex, and then he lied about it, we can't have that. So which is going to be worse, right? Being involved with foreign organized crime or having sex with a porn star? What do you think? What do you think could bring down Trump? I'm increasingly thinking there's almost nothing that could bring down Trump. Because as long as he's got the support of a bunch of billionaires who are looking out for their own economic interest and are willing to lie in their advertising and in the right-wing think tanks that they subsidize, it's going to be harder and harder and harder to take down anybody like Trump politically, in my humble opinion.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
He's got this multi-billion-dollar right-wing media infrastructure, from Fox News to the right-wing hate radio to all this stuff. I think it's going to be very difficult to take him down. We're reading today from the American Revolution of 1800 by Dan Sisson. He wrote the book 40 years ago. Recently, I went through, Dan and I actually went through, I wrote a foreword and an afterword to it and did some substantial editing on the book. And it's something you need to read. This is from the introduction, which I wrote. It is rare when a book about our early republic is relevant 40 years after it was originally published. It is rarer still when that book provides insight into national problems we refuse to solve 2 centuries later. You are therefore holding in your hands or reading on your pad or computer one of the most important books you will ever encounter. Here's why. Unlike other histories of this era, this book is written from a revolutionary perspective, much like Jefferson's generation viewed the world. The American Revolution of 1800 was not just about an election. It was about the life and death struggle for power between democratic-republican principles and oligarchic plutocratic values based on corruption. In short, this book, by implication, is about the identical crisis America faces today. The author's unique analysis is based on the idea of faction controlling party and how both undermine constitutional government. In an age where modern parties and the factions that control them have paralyzed our government, this book validates the politics of the founders. In still another contribution, the book demonstrates how preserving revolutionary ideas within our culture depends on understanding the classical tradition. The ability to recognize a demagogue is rooted deeply in the role Caesar played in destroying the Republic of ancient Rome. That fear of a Caesar inspired Jefferson and others to organize citizens against the Federalists, thereby completely contradicting the political rules of their time. This book, above all, presents a profoundly positive view of Jefferson and his creativity in the midst of crisis. It celebrates his gift 24 years after he wrote the Declaration of Independence and proves he never abandoned his principles or his revolutionary vision for America's future. Ironically, it's become a cliche in political and economic circles that while we love Thomas Jefferson, we live in a country largely run by Alexander Hamilton's policies and John Adams's politics. This may have been more true of the roughly 200 years before the contemporary free trade era, beginning in the 1970s under Richard Nixon and exploding in the mid-1990s when Bill Clinton signed NAFTA. Alexander Hamilton must be rolling over in his grave. Nevertheless, we have become a mercantilist nation dominated by banks and big industries as Hamilton envisioned. It is true that there were huge differences between Hamilton and Jefferson, particularly in their visions for the future of America and its economy. And those divisions tend to dominate interpretations of our political discussion when we reference the era of our first few presidents. But a much larger and more dramatic battle of worldviews played out in the late 1790s between President John Adams and Vice President Thomas Jefferson, leading directly to what is arguably the most transformational presidential election in the history of the United States, the election of 1800. In other books and places, both Dan Sisson and I have written at some length about the differences between these two men and their respective visions of America. Adams relished throwing newspapers editors in prison and demanded that when he and his wife visited a town, the local militia come out to fire their cannons and salute of him and shout, "God save President Adams." Jefferson was so horrified by Adams's Alien and Sedition Acts that he left town the day they were signed into law, and as president often wore simple homespun garments. He was known to answer the front door of the White House in his bathrobe, and more than one visitor mistook him for a servant. As president, Jefferson literally acted out his egalitarian visions of America. In my book, The Crash of 2016, The Plot to Destroy America and What We Can Do to Stop It, I describe Jefferson's concern over aristocracy in American politics. On October 28, 1813, in a letter to his old rival John Adams, Jefferson commented on his distrust of America's growing wealthy elite, naming in particular the Senate, which was not then democratically elected by the people. Referring to the, quote, cabal in the Senate of the United States, end quote, Jefferson wrote, "You, John Adams, think it best to put the pseudo-aristoi into a separate chamber of legislation, the Senate, where they may be hindered from doing their mischief by their coordinate branches, and where also they may be a protection to wealth against the agrarian and plundering enterprises of the majority of the people." Then Jefferson countered in the letter, writing, "I do not believe them, the Senate, necessary to protect the wealthy, because enough of them will find their way into every branch of the legislation to protect themselves." Instead, Jefferson wrote, "I think the best remedy is exactly that provided by all our constitutions, to leave to the citizens the free election. In general, they will elect the really good and wise. In some instances, wealth may corrupt and birth blind them, but not in sufficient degree to endanger society." And in a final warning about the largely Federalist cabal in the Senate, these would be the conservatives of their time, Jefferson wrote, quote, "The artificial aristocracy is a mischievous ingredient in government, and provision should be made to prevent its ascendancy. I think that to give them power in order to prevent them from doing mischief is arming them for it, and increasing instead of remedying the evil." In a 1786 letter to George Washington, Jefferson gave his most explicit warning about this threat. of a military allied with a plutocracy within and advocated for unwavering vigilance against it. Quote, though the day may be at some distance, beyond the reach of our lives perhaps, yet it will certainly come, when a single fiber left of this institution will produce an hereditary aristocracy which will change the form of our governments from the best to the worst in the world. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. Brad in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. Hey, Brad, what's on your mind?
Hi, it's great to be on the air as I'm on a little much, but here's the thing. Back in the 1980s, wasn't there a bunch of Russian purchasers of the condos in Trump Tower? And on top of that, when you start talking about allegiance to foreign powers, investors, doesn't that become something along the Manchurian Candidate treasonous line?
Well, that's the whole point. That's the question that I'm wondering is, what is it going to take for Americans to turn on Donald Trump? Is it going to take for them to realize that he's been putting people into place like Ryan Zinke and Scott Pruitt and Betsy DeVos, whose specific goal is to transfer public assets to private assets, whether it's privatizing our schools, polluting our air and water, or selling off our public lands? Is that going to do it? Is it going to be that he's acting on behalf of foreign interests, of foreign oligarchs? Is that going to do it? Is it going to be that he's having, he had sex with women who weren't his wives, and his wives, I guess you say it plurally, and didn't report it? Or is it going to be something else altogether? What do you think it's going to take, Brad?
The Christian, the unchristian right wing is totally compromised on this, and I just think that, I don't know, is it going to take something that happens where it's almost too late to do anything once it happens? Yeah. That's my great fear.
Well, yeah, my great fear is another 9/11 kind of incident while you've got somebody like Donald Trump in the White House, including one that might be of, say, less than stellar provenance, but origin. But yeah.
Or it's just almost a takedown of some part of the government. Yeah. That's what I'm really worried about, that he's in a position now where he's just nobody. Gosh,
look at what they're doing to EPA. Look at what they're doing to Interior. Look at what they're. Look at what they're doing to Labor Department. Agency after agency. Brad, excellent points, all. Thank you for the call. Tyrone in New York City. Hey, Tyrone, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, it's Tom. When I think about Abraham Lincoln, and he was the great negotiator and someone that was extremely workable, and he came to the conclusion that there are Americans that are non-negotiable. And we trying to negotiate with Donald Trump, and with him constantly just spitting in our face, not even trying to appease anything that we need done. Everything that we accomplished, we have to fight tooth and nail, and then we try to accommodate. We try to say, oh well, he's not that bad. He leaned a little bit. No, he don't lean a little bit. We're gonna have to understand what we're up against in dealing with Donald Trump and some of the people that is his supporters. They're not trying to be accommodating. They're gonna follow Donald Trump, like he said. He could kill somebody or shoot somebody, and his supporters will still support him. All he has to do is holler Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, just like in the past, all they had to do is holler, "Hey, look at that black person over there. Look at that gay person over there. Look at that, look at that Hispanic over there. Look at that woman." I mean, that was Rush Limbaugh's original claim to fame. Oh my God, women in the workplace, they're feminazis. Yeah.
So I don't know if we're going to have to toughen up, and we got to get true progressives you know, not if we're not dealing with the corporate Democrats, if we're dealing with the progressive Democrats, and I know that's a battle in between for us, because we don't want to be beholden to the corporate interests, but we also don't want to be completely left out.
Yeah.
So we got a battle within ourselves that is going on, and that's why I don't really this Mueller and all this other stuff. All of those are Republicans.
Yeah.
All of those are Republicans fighting against each other.
Yeah, no matter how much Donald Trump lies about it. Yep.
Yeah, so what we have to do is concentrate on getting ourselves together, realizing where we at. If we are going to be corporate Democrats or progressive Democrats, people that are going to be for people that are different from us.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, basically, are we going to be Democrats who are here by and for we the people, or is it going to be, you know, up by and for the corporate interests? Tyrone, I got to move along, but thank you. Excellent contribution to the discussion. Dave in Newport Richey, Florida. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Tom. Happy birthday, buddy.
Thank you.
I'll take a crack at the question you posed that's going to bring Trump down. I don't think it's going to be the sex scandals, because we all knew what he was like beforehand.
Right.
And it needs to be the Russian thing. He's going to be so guilty. Mueller's going to bring him down hard. And it has to be, because there's something far more important than getting Trump out of there. It's bringing down this entire complicit Republican Party. You know, they are the ones who have strained our institutions. You know, the Constitution has remedies for tyrants or knaves in the Oval Office. What they didn't imagine, the founders, was a whole party of complicit, party first, literal traitors, because this is nothing short of treason. And we can't, and this goes to another question you posed a while back before one of your breaks, you know, how do we walk back all the damage they've done? We have to purge this country of Republicans in office at every level. They are no longer a legitimate party. They don't try and win support or debates or elections by merits of a legitimate argument. They try and dupe you. They try and throw sand in your eyes at every turn. And, you know, we can't fix our problems until we identify them. You did that. I turned on the radio today, and you were talking about this very thing. And you're so right, and I'm glad, you know, you're just clear-eyed and speaking cold hard truth. It's critical.
Thank you, Dave. It's spot on. We've got to wake up. You know, Andrea in Crawfordville, Florida. Hey, Andrea, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Happy birthday. Pleasure to be talking to you. I listen to your show all the time.
Thank you.
I wanted to touch on something that a couple of your earlier callers I heard mention when you talk about the difference between the expression of Christianity between African Americans and Caucasians. That is absolutely a thing. I actually teach history at the college level, and I've been teaching this concept for several years now. And if you go all the way back to the Second Great Awakening during the 19th century, when many African Americans were first gaining exposure to the Judeo-Christian tradition.
You're talking the 1870s to the 1890s there, the whole transcendentalist movement and that stuff?
Well, I actually when you talk about the 1890s, that's actually getting you late into the 19th century. I'm talking about the 1830s, 40s, which did include the transcendental movement.
Right.
It also was the kickstart or the fuel behind a lot of the reform movements dealing with temperance and women's rights and all the rest of it of the mid-19th century.
Yep.
And a lot of the exposure to Christianity was at that time under the guise of it will make for better slaves. You know, it'll make them more docile. It'll make them more passive. And so when slaves attended church services with their masters, they frequently got treated to theology rooted in passages of scripture like Ephesians 6:5, slaves obey your masters. Of course, everybody's favorite commandment, thou shalt not steal. And also, you know, not to be too concerned with their life here on earth because their true reward is in the afterlife. But as I was explaining to your screener, African Americans throughout the South frequently, as an act of protest, would take to the woods surrounding the plantations that they lived on and conduct secret church meetings. And it was out of these secret church meetings that if you look at the founding dates of a lot of your African American churches, particularly in the South, They were established out in the open after the Civil War during Reconstruction. But a lot of those churches actually had their start before the Civil War in the woods where the slaves had to worship in secret. Because for them to have gotten caught without the presence of a white person engaging in any form of, meeting or camaraderie and the like, could have been, punishable. And when they did their church services in secret, the theology that they exercised was much more Old Testament based, and they were particularly attracted, and you might understand why, they were particularly attracted to Exodus stories.
Yes.
Because they saw themselves as the ancient Israelites who were similarly enslaved by an oppressive master, an oppressive power in Egypt. And so that's where they derived a lot of their mental and psychological strength to withstand the rigors of enslavement.
Yeah, that's
and I mean,
remarkable.
that's really continued on into this very day. So,
yeah.
I mean, even in 2018, you go into a church, quote unquote, in the white church, messages you're going to hear from the pulpit, it's the same Bible, but it's not only going to be different in mode, but it's going to be different in emphasis.
I get it, and out of its origin stories, essentially. Yeah, brilliant, Andrea. Thank you so much for that lesson, and thank you for educating me. I appreciate it.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
15 minutes before the hour, back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Alice in Harbor City, California. Hey, Alice. Thanks for watching Free Speech
Hey,
TV.
Tom. I think that it's important that these young people who are not joining religions and the progressive religious movement be alerted to the fact that the right-wing religious bigots are attacking our First Amendment freedom of religion right and left, and it doesn't seem to be out there in the media. The religious groups have defined the end does not justify the means to the end does justify the means, and therefore the religious right is using Donald Trump because although he is flawed, their end to outlaw abortion and get the money for that and to legislate freedom of conscience and to legislate their religious beliefs is extremely strong in the White House.
Well,
there are particularly Catholic groups in the White House, two women that I happen to know of in the annex, who are doing their religious bit, and they have religious statues in their office, give out holy cards. The Department of Religion has been signed into effect by Donald Trump. There is a religion of religion in the State Department run by Brownback, I think formerly of Kansas.
Yep.
And the conservative groups, who I think in many respects have been brainwashed, really do want to get pro-life Democrats elected this November. And they are attacking Pelosi and any of the Catholics who are pro-choice and justifying their beliefs to legislate their own doctrines. And that's going to affect all of these people who don't want to join churches, who want to do their own thing. And I think it's extremely important that people be aware that religion should not be legislated. And the First Amendment has always kind of confused me. I think it should be freedom from religion, but I understand the preposition of and from when they were writing it. And the other thing I'm interested in, Tom, do you know anything about Ronnie Reagan Jr. and his group, Freedom from Religion?
I know Ron Reagan, and I am familiar with the group. Ron's been an advocate for freedom from religion for a long time. It seems to me,
well,
Alice,
would it be possible for you to get him on your show so that, you know, maybe we could be more informed of what he's doing?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't talked to Ron in a while. I'd have to restart those conversations. But it seems to, and Alice, thank you for the call. It seems to me that the real essential problem right now that modern day Christianity has is that they have been willing to engage in the noble lie, right? Telling women that they'll get cancer if they have an abortion. They know it's a lie. They consider it the noble lie. Telling young people, you know, the best birth control is abstinence. It's a lie, but they call it a noble lie. Arguing that the Earth is only 5,000 years old. Most of them realize it's a lie, but they consider it a noble lie. You could argue that this whole idea of the noble lie really began with Santa Claus, right? That we were all taught that it's okay to have a noble lie, to fool our children until they're 6 or 7 or 8 years old. Those noble lies are no longer noble, and they're destroying the church. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. So continuing our conversation here, Ray in McHenry, Illinois. Hey, Ray, your thoughts on evangelicals sticking with Trump?
Yeah, I grew up an evangelical. Here's some things I was thinking about. I don't know if anybody's ever shared this, but most people have an external locus of control, which means they see others and what happens to them as being the cause of how they feel. Well, evangelicals have a variation on that where they seek and even pray for the help of someone outside themselves to deliver them from the misery on earth. Think about how many times Trump portrayed himself as that person. How many times do we hear him say, I'm the only one that can do something, which is really close to what I remember hearing growing up as an evangelical, that Jesus said, I am the way, I am the light. And the other thing is the word believe is also such a big part of their lives. They've been taught, you're brainwashed almost to believe in spite of all kinds of evidence in your life to the contrary that might suggest it doesn't make sense or doesn't do any good or might even hurt. And to have faith and believe even more when you start to have doubts, and never, ever lose your faith in Jesus or God. Trump, think about how many times Trump used the words, believe me, believe me.
It's fascinating.
And to me, that's just
fascinating.
tapping into that, believe in me, believe in him. It's like conditioning of Pavlov's dogs. It's just he's tapping into something very deep.
It's conditioning in the context of a salvationistic culture. I mean, the whole key to evangelical and salvationistic religions is that they believe that some force external of us will save us. Jesus will save you. And so if you are conditioned to believe in salvationism, then believing that Trump is going to be your savior makes perfect sense. That's amazing. Ray, thanks for that. Veronica in Milwaukee. Hey, Veronica, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Happy birthday, Tom.
Thanks, Veronica.
My birthday is tomorrow.
Say what?
So I had to call you on your birthday.
Oh, one of my brother's birthdays is tomorrow too. It's
go on.
Another Taurus, yeah.
Is he like you?
No, I have 3 younger brothers, and I'm born on the 7th. One is born on the 8th, and one is born on the 13th of May. So apparently every September my parents took a vacation.
Did they take vacation?
Yeah.
Well, your mother did a wonderful job.
I think so, too.
And what I've noticed about people like us is that we're very spiritual oriented.
Amen. Tauruses, yeah. So,
And I
Veronica,
feel
what do you call it about?
And I'm a retired educator.
Mm-hmm.
I was a school psychologist. I had to shrink their little minds and straighten them out really quickly. And I loved every moment of it. I thought, I'm getting paid for something that I love. Every day I thought, I love this job, God. You gave me the perfect job. So I went around talking, hopefully inspiring them. Mm-hmm. So I want to tell you two main things. So I don't want to take up all your time because I'm going to be old tomorrow, so I got a lot of stories to tell. I went to over 16 countries. I have been blessed. Right down the road from Tibet, Dharamsala, home of the Dalai Lama. Yes, I did climb that mountain and went up to the top. And what I found was a spiritual people isolated from us. They wouldn't know where you're located, or there was nothing to communicate except word of mouth. I couldn't believe it. It was like I had stepped back into the 18th century.
Yeah.
But they were loving and kind, the rishis and sadhus. They would look at you and their eyes looked like the Sphinx, that looked like the pyramid. It was so filled with love and wisdom. Okay, I'm getting off on a tangent of I didn't want to tell you about the story. My students told me, write a book. And if your students tell you to write a book, when they feel forced to read a book, then you know they've touched your heart with some of your stories. So I was there almost 2 years, so I have a lot of stories to tell. And most of them would say in each country, are all Americans like you? Yeah. So communicative and love everybody? I said, yes. Most Americans are like me. I was unpaid goodwill ambassador. And I said they love their kids. They want them educated. They want to be educated. They do not want war.
That is marvelous.
Our politicians want that.
Veronica,
they said, yeah, we hate your politicians, but we love the American people.
Veronica, what's the point you called to make?
Love the American people. We don't know what we're doing. They know more about us than we do about them.
Yeah.
So I'll cut that short, too, and go to my last one. I had a friend that was an astrologer. He's going on to heaven now, Chris Pierce. And he went to it, and he said before he passed, and this was about 17 years ago, he said, these children that are being born, it's a special door they're coming through. They're going to be the next Martin Luther King, the next Mahatma Gandhi.
Let us hope so. Veronica, I want to get one more caller in here before the end of the show. I'm sorry, but I have less than a minute left. Greg in Richmond, Kentucky. Hey, Greg, what's up? Greg?
Yes, can you?
Whoop. Oh, Greg. Let's try Jesse in Downers Grove, Illinois. Jesse, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. This is yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. You have a half a minute.
Oh, yes.
Or less.
I remember 2014 or 2015. I had sort of you had me at hello moment, and you were talking about race and sort of the minor indignities that people face every day, and I totally identify with that. And just in response to what the caller said earlier about the man jumping in the parking lot, and I just thought that it's so ironic that, people with a heritage whose forebears, they did so much to harm other people.
Jesse, I'm sorry, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being with us today. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It just doesn't work without you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.